House of the Dragon, oh geez. Chapter 1. Runestone, in the private quarters of Lady Rhea Royce. While the first snow of winter gathers upon the Vale's high peaks, Rhea sat on her bed of oak and bronze, where a newborn son rests beside her. And to disturb that peace, Lord Hubert Royce of Runestone enters, grim-faced and weary. "You should have sent for me sooner, Rhea. Word of your labor reached me only later from the whispers echoing through the halls of Runestone, and from a raven that arrived belatedly at the eyrie," he said. "I could have been here, to support you in such times. But you know now, do you not? That I am delivered of a son." Looking at her little boy as she said and questioned. "And what of the matter of his heritage? It is what I truly need your support for." Hubert sighed and let out the grim news. "It is a bastard born out of your betrayal," he says. "That Prince Daemon denied his own child." Rhea hated bitterly. "Denied by a man who swore before gods and witnesses to be my husband. Daemon Targaryen is as mad and cruel as expected, to not even own the life he set quick within me. With what excuse? What lies did he say to make mine son a bastard and disgrace mine honor? As you know, he claims he has not left King's Landing these 11 moons." Hubert reminded. "With his loyal men and the people of the capital as his witnesses. So, he claims that loudly." Rhea muttered in exhaustion. "I would not have any of his beguiled men say I speak false, yet I have none that can prove he was here. But he did come to me, one night, cloaked and unannounced, when the moon was thin, clouds heavy. Perhaps to hide his use of a dragon and plan this whole twisted deception. The Lord of Runestone knew that story and believed her, he does. Alas, the king and mayhaps the queen lend some ear to his tongue even if he is akin to a black sheep to their dragon family. What a conciliator, what a good queen," Rhea said with scornful mockery. "To wrong us like so. To wed me to a monster and fault their great-grandson as this." Hubert should have chastised her for maligning the realm's rulers, instead he appeased. "Time will tell your truth, Rhea. But I'm also afraid time may not have been kind to King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne. Their old age is clouding their judgment and recent tragedies have worsened it." Gravely, he added. "So, at present, the boy cannot bear the name Targaryen, if the prince disowns him and the royal family does not accept him." Then and there, Rhea decided. "So let him bear mine. He is of my blood, Royce born, and no less for Daemon's shame." "If it were so simple," Hubert said grimly. "The laws of men and the tongues of fools will not grant him our bronze. If the prince's seed he is not, the people of the Vale and the rest of Westeros will call him Stone, as they name all sons with such marital complications." "Stone!" Rhea shouted with rising anger. "Shall my son, born in lawful wedlock, suckle that name? Shall Runestone's heir apparent be cast among the bastards of shepherds and camp followers? Even if the other houses say otherwise, why not legitimize him? You are the lord of the Royces, are you not? Be at ease, Rhea. Rage will not mend this," the Runestone lord said. "The favor is against us. If the Targaryens are in the understanding that he is a bastard, then he must be a bastard for others. That is the weight of their decisions, backed by dragons. Calling your son a Royce, as right as it should be, will be seen as an affront and act of mutiny given that you are still the prince's wife. Let the dragons choke upon their pride." Rhea raged on. "I will not see my boy scorned while I draw breath. It would be to challenge the judgment of the realm's rulers," Hubert Royce reminded. "Think of the consequences and trouble that it will bring to our house." Rhea defended that. "I would only speak the truth before the gods and all the realm. Let them hear that Daemon Targaryen bedded me, and from that night came this child. Let them see the boy when he grows. If his hair turns silver as moonlight, what then shall they say? Time will tell your truth, as I said." Hubert reasoned. "They will say the gods mock us. Yet I would counsel care, Rhea. The Targaryens guard their honor as they guard their dragons. To cross them is peril." The new mother remained adamant. "Then let peril come. I am a Royce of Runestone. Our bronze does not bend, even when dragons burn." Hubert sighed once again. "Bronze bends, Rhea, for dragon fire it will. So, we can only begrudgingly accept that the realm will call him Stone. But mind you that here, in these halls, he shall be yours and mine to shield, and he can be called whatever your name for him is. It is all that I, in mine weakness, can do for the both of you." He wearily added. "Ashamed, as a descendant of the Bronze Kings of old, to have fallen this way. To such a plight, Rhea could only understand, even if it pained her so. And after a while of rumination and gazing at her newborn son, she said, "Then let him be Ronan Stone of Runestone until his truth burns bright enough to melt the bronze and shame the dragons. By then, he will become Ronan Royce while the Targaryens could only hope to claim him for their mistake." Lord Royce breathed relief. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he said to her that, "The gods bless you, Rhea. The fight you choose is not a small one. Nor is the love I bear my son." Rhea affirmed. "But I must say that for this grudge, I will remember." "We remember, Rhea." Lord Royce echoed, in the motto of their house. "We remember." Chapter 2. Oh geez, this was awkward, but he also remembered. Awkward because this was a thought that was actually coming from a baby. The baby, caught in between the very medievalesque talks of the older Royces. One should be his new mother, while the other is his relative of unclear relations. And apparently, he was now Ronan. Granted, he had other names to go for from the top of his head, like Rolls maybe, to become Rolls Royce, but what can he do? He's just a baby at the moment and it is what it is. Either way, this should technically be the day he is named, even when it is already 5 days past his traumatic exit from the womb. Because his surname is pretty disputed, apparently. Because of the mess that Daemon Targaryen was stirring. And yeah, because of that connection between Daemon Targaryen and Rhea Royce, it is clear that he was in the House of the Dragon. As a deviation from what was supposed to be a barren marriage. Thankfully, he watched that show. And as mentioned, he remembered that his mother looked suspiciously similar to that woman that got unhorsed and got her head bashed. So, House of the Dragon, the TV show it is. He remembered watching it and remembered everything else from his life before this. When he was a normal man from a normal world, with his most notable feat being a writer of fanfiction, with some originals in his belt as well. But fanfiction took the cake. 'Cause he wrote lots of it. Mostly self-indulgent garbage about Hollywood, pop culture staples, and anime-based stories. And they were all trash, as he notes to his readers time and time again. He also wrote some Game of Thrones self-inserts, but look at where he was now, actually having his own self-inserted, albeit in a sister title to the franchise of A Song of Ice and Fire. What are the odds? That he was another Daemon and Rhea child, like many other fanfics like it. Still, he wasn't really sure why or how he was here, or what kind of cosmic joke this was, but he was kind of looking forward to it. Sorry to his old life and all that, but this is actually very cool. Especially when he introspected even deeper into his mind. Further into his consciousness, subconscious, or whatever. Where he saw a faint light. From a page, unfolding like paper in his dark thoughts. Words appeared there, glowing faintly, written in perfect neat script. Like a centered title, it wrote, "Heaven rewards diligence." He didn't know what that meant, yet. Though he had ideas, 'cause it was quite familiar. Maybe it was advice. Maybe it was a warning. Or maybe it was so much more. Either way, the message and the page stayed, and no doubt that it will most likely help a lot. For he was Ronan now. Ronan Stone. Ronan Royce. Ronan Targaryen, or whatever the hell this life will lead him to be called. And perhaps with this Goldfinger of a page, he'll write his own epic story, with him actually living it and not just writing it. Chapter 3. With all that out of the way, in the first year of his life, the child born of Lady Rhea Royce and her estranged husband, Prince Daemon Targaryen, grew beneath the shadow of Runestone's runes and shields of bronze. He was called Ronan. And through the mouths of courtiers and small folk alike, a designated last name clung to him far more readily, which is none other than Stone. Instead of Royce or Targaryen. For all Lady Rhea's insistence that her son was born of lawful wedlock, the realm had turned its ear to the prince's denial. And so the boy, who had entered the world amid cold winds and cruel whispers, was made to wear the mark of being a bastard as other babes wear swaddling cloth. Yet within the Royce seat, there were those who treated him not as a stain but as kin. Though rarely present due to his duties at the Eyrie, Lord Hubert Royce himself saw proper to the child's welfare and treatment, granting nurse and maids, and allowing Lady Rhea her peace within the bronze-walled keep. Ever since the discrediting of her claims, the helpers of Runestone said she seldom smiled, save when the boy reached for her hair or clutched her finger with his tiny hands. By the moon of his 6th month, baby Ronan's sparse hair began to grow, black as jet, with not a single thread of Targaryen silver. To some who paid attention to the drama, this was proof enough of Daemon's claim. The gods mark true blood and the dragon's blood is marked by silver, which is what some say. But others, more kind or cautious, murmured that the color of a babe's hair was a poor measure of his parentage. Supposing that the babe's gray eyes which has hints of purple as support. Be that as it may, the gossip reached even to King's Landing, where courtiers jested of the bronze bitch's black-haired whelp. Principal of which is the Prince Daemon himself, who was said to have laughed, saying only that, the seed of the dragon does not root in disloyal bronze. Still, Runestone endured. Lady Rhea raised her son among her people, singing him the songs of the Vale and reciting the names of the runes carved in her hall's pillars, as if the babe would even care. Though she could not change his name in the eyes of the realm, she gave him all else that might belong to a trueborn son: love, learning, and lineage. But outside of Runestone, the realm continued to be unkind. At some point, missives bore tidings of a great tourney, proclaimed to celebrate the 50th year of King Jaehaerys' reign. Knights from across the 7 kingdoms descended upon the capital, bearing banners bright as flame, and the streets swelled with revelry. The tourney was said to be the grandest since the conquest itself, with an established prince of Rognus favored to win the lists, and the royal dragons wheeled above the city in slow, burning majesty. To the common folk, it was a testament to the unbroken strength of House Targaryen. However, the spectacle did baby Ronan no favors. The more the singers praised the silver-haired princes and the splendor of the dragons, the more the gossip of the dark-haired bastard of Runestone curdled into scorn. By the year's end, one can only hope that the realm forgot him, save for those within his home. There, under the watchful eyes of runes and the echo of strong winds through the Vale, Ronan Stone passed his first name day, a child denied by dragons but cradled by the mountains that meet the sea. Growing in a castle of runes and stones. Chapter 4. In the second year of Ronan's life, the snows came early to the Vale. The winds that swept from the mountains sang mournful songs through the halls of Runestone, and Lady Rhea's hearth burned longer than ever before. Yet even as the flames danced upon her family's walls, northwest warmth could drive out the chill that had settled upon the realm. Word came from King's Landing that the youngest child of King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne, sweet Princess Gale, had cast herself into the sea. She had been called the Winter Child, gentle of heart and fair of face, and her death struck even the hardiest knights dumb with pity. Some say it was summer fever, or just winter fever. But the tale spread quickly, of how a wandering singer had won her love, how she had borne his bastard stillborn, and how grief had driven her to her end. When Lady Rhea heard it, she went silent for a long while. She knew too well the whispers that followed a woman shamed by love and scorned by those who do not know the truth of it all. Though Gale's sorrow had drowned her, Rhea lived still, bound to the same dishonor by a husband's denial and a realm's indifference. A child born in wedlock and yet named a bastard. She murmured once, holding her son close. As if the weight of that word might snuff out his life as surely as the sea had claimed the princess. Though she wondered, if Princess Gale's babe lived, how would the Targaryens treat said child of the Winter Child? Would it be the same as Ronan's fate? Or something different? Accordingly, in the wake of Gale's death came another loss. Septon Barth, the hand of the king, passed peacefully in his sleep. To many, it was a mercy. To those who knew the old man's worth, it was a doom. The wise Septon had ever been the voice of reason beside the Iron Throne, tempering dragons with faith and fire with sense. With his death, the realm lost not only its hand but its conscience. The old king, stricken by grief from Gale's death and that following loss of the Septon, named Ser Ryam Redwine to take Barth's place. A king's guard and knight of great honor and renown, yet no man known for books or policy. To those in Runestone, the choice was of little concern, but in the great tapestry of the realm, it marked an array of frayings that happened during Jaehaerys' later reign. Which was a worrisome development. But still, the realm went on. Within Runestone's bronze walls, young Ronan began to take his first steps. His babble echoed through the halls that had so long known only silence, and for a time, Lady Rhea smiled again. He had his mother's strength of gaze, and though his hair stayed black as jet, his eyes gleamed with a strange gray, flecked faintly with violet when caught by torchlight. The maester took note of it more than once, but dared not speak the thought aloud. To the small folk, the boy was known simply as Ronan Stone. The name clung to him as the winter winds clung to the cliffs. To Lady Rhea, he was Ronan Royce, son of her body and heir to her blood, though only a few would say it so. Even if said babe should still not be cognizant, she taught him words of the Vale, the runes of her house, and the old songs that told of bronze knights who cowered to no dragon, even if the latter was but a wish. Beyond the mountains, the realm wept for a dead princess and a fallen Septon. In their mourning, no one cared to hear of a boy in the Vale, half dragon, half warrior of bronze, and wholly unwanted by the royal line that had sired him. Yet the mountains remembered, and the runes endured. Thus passed the second year of Ronan's life, in a world where his truth found no ear, and his blood no honor, all the while that the king's peace began to wane and sorrow swept through the Targaryen line. Chapter 5. The third year of Ronan's life dawned with a thin spring sun over the vale, cold and shy, as though the heavens themselves feared to look too long upon the world below. The snows withdrew only half-heartedly that year, leaving Runestone draped in mist and lingering frost. Yet within its walls, life persisted, stubborn as the runes that were inscribed in many of its corners and olden tools. Ronan had long begun to speak in halting words, the sort that tumble from a child's mouth like uncut stones, rough, imperfect, but precious all the same. "Mama," he would say, tugging at Lady Rhea's sleeve. Or "bird," when the falcons or ravens cried beyond the window. In a rare instance, they heard him curse drats when he was seen mingling with castle rats. And oddly enough, meow meow ma meow, in a sad tone whenever he spots a sickly cat. He was quick of eye and quicker of hand, reaching for things he ought not touch, and his laughter, rare but bright, seemed to fill the old halls with echoes long thought lost. Those who watched him whispered that the boy was clever beyond his years. The Maester of Runestone recorded that he learned to walk before the turning of his first name day. And by the coming of his second, he could climb the small steps and stroll the halls of the castle without wanting aid. His curiosity spared no corner of the keep. Often he was found by the hearth, tracing the carved sigils upon the stones with tiny fingers, murmuring the shapes and arrangements of runes as Lady Rhea had taught him earlier on. And yet, beyond those proud walls, the realm bent once more beneath the weight of sorrow. At King's Landing, the appointed Ser Ryam Redwine, once lauded as a knight of unmatched valor, had proven ill-fitted to rule the council chambers. His knowledge was lacking and his words wandered. By the time he begged release from his duties, few at court were surprised, and fewer still mourned his return to duties as a white cloak. In his stead, the old king named his son, the spring Prince Balin or Balin the Brave, his living and present son, as both hand and heir. For a moment, hope flickered in the royal halls. Songs were sung in Balin's praise, and the people took heart that peace might yet endure beneath his hand. But joy, like tempered breeze in the vale, seldom lingers long. In the seventh moon, black tidings swept from Dragonstone. The good Queen Alysanne, the realm's mother, the peacemaker, the queen who had fought for women and the weak, had breathed her last. She had no tears left to shed, and so the stranger took her to the mother in peace, which was what many claimed. Still, her passing struck the realm as a storm might fell an old oak, sudden, inevitable, and grievous. The old king shut himself away, and for many days, none were permitted to enter his chambers. From Old Town to other cities, bells tolled in mourning, from the Red Keep's high towers to the smallest sept in the fingers, candles were lit for the good queen's soul. In Runestone, the news came as a whisper borne on a chill wind. Lady Rhea sat long in silence upon hearing it. She had only met Alysanne in a few glimpses and greetings due to the unexpected betrothal, yet those scant memories of the queen lingered. Her decrees protecting women's rights, her kindness to those wronged by men of power. Had she not secluded herself? Rhea said softly. Perhaps she would have heard me and truly listened. For though 3 years had passed since Ronan's birth, Daemon Targaryen's denial still held sway, unchallenged by king or court. Rhea's pleas had grown quieter, not from surrender but from exhaustion. In the eyes of the realm, her son remained Ronan's stone. Still, within their home, life went on. The boy grew stronger, climbing walls he should not climb, laughing at the wind, chasing the falcon's shadow across the courtyard. When he smiled, Rhea's heart ached, for in him she saw not only what she had lost but what the world refused to see, that her son was no shadow of shame, but her living defiance. Thus passed a century after Aegon's conquest, the year that took the good queen from the realm, while a mother in bronze raised her child that his supposed great-grandmother had set aside. Chapter 6. When 100 years after Aegon's conquest eventually dawned, Runestone was still stuck in between slopes and waves. Beneath veils of fog and snow, far removed from the greater matters of the realm. Yet even its calmness could not keep out the tremors of change that began to shake the 7 kingdoms. Prince Balin the Brave, the king's last surviving son in succession, had died from a sudden belly sickness, and his passing left the Iron Throne without a clear heir. Regardless, the prince's life had been full of purpose, his death full of consequence. A belly burst and matters took a turn for the worst. For without Balin, the royal bloodline stood in doubt. Even more than when they doubted the supposed grandson he never paid much attention to. The old King Jaehaerys, long revered as the conciliator, was by then aged and frail, the years and sorrows of his reign etched deep upon him. His body was almost failing, but his will endured. To preserve peace, he summoned the lords of Westeros to Harrenhal for what would be remembered as the Great Council, the first of its kind in the history of the realm. He called for this Great Council to prevent a war being fought over his succession. For he knew the cold truth. The only thing that could tear down the House of the Dragon was itself. 14 names were said to be offered for succession, though only 2 shone bright enough to draw true support. Prince Viserys, the late Baelin's eldest son. And Princess Rhaenys, the late Aemon's eldest daughter. The eldest daughter of the eldest son. It was said that the debates within those blackened halls lasted for weeks. With the Spring Prince dead, who will be the heir? Will it be to a woman or will it pass to the men? Banners of 100 houses fluttered beside those great and small. And though Runestone sent no delegation of its own, Lady Rhea Royce heard every word that filtered through raven and rumor. She might have wondered then, had the gods been less cruel, if her own son's name could have one day been spoken among them. For was he not of Targaryen blood through his father? Yet such thoughts were folly. Her son had long been struck from the line of dragons by the very men who now called this council into being. Even Lord Yorbert, who had attended as Lady Jane's regent, hasn't had his pleas heard. In any case, the decision came swift and sure. Prince Viserys was chosen by overwhelming acclaim, the lords of Westeros lifting him as heir for his gentle manner, and his opportune descent through the male line. Thus, Viserys became the heir to the Iron Throne, and the matter of succession, though settled, left embers that would perhaps smolder for years to come. While in Runestone, it was the same as always, but also different. For young Ronan reached his 4th name day. He grew quickly, fair of face with hints of his father's fierce features but dark of hair, with grey eyes circled with purple, as a sign of his ancestries. He was as lively as any child of his years, prone to laughter and mischief, though his mother swore his gaze was older than his flesh, thoughtful, too often aware. The Maester of Runestone began to tutor him in simple letters and tales. To the learned man's surprise, the boy took to learning as a hawk to flight. He memorized words after hearing them only a few times, traced letters in both ink and snow, and would spend hours poring over the same book until he could recite whole passages, and form it into better knowledge. It was no simple feat and a trait that would prove to be a boon for many in the future to come. Whilst at 5, he had begun to ask questions the Maester could scarce answer, about dragons, bloodlines, prophecies, runes, the first men, children of the forest, giants, magic. Then it was about taming, breeding, calculations, forging, shipbuilding and so on. The Maester could only reply with what he could, consult from the Royce stockpiles, and ask for new text from the Citadel when he could. Hungry for truth and progress, the young boy was. Then came the year 103 AC. The year that ended an age. King Jaehaerys I, the old king, passed peacefully in his sleep after 55 years upon the Iron Throne. The realm mourned as it had not mourned in living memory. Bells tolled across the 7 kingdoms. From Dragonstone to King's Landing, dragons were seen circling in the skies, as if they, too, felt the weight of his passing. Vermithor much more so. For Lady Rhea, the king's death carried a bitter taste. Jaehaerys had been the foremost decision upon her son's heritage, the one who had sealed his fate as stone. And now he was gone, beyond reach, beyond appeal, beyond mercy. But for the world, a new chapter had begun. Prince Viserys ascended the Iron Throne as King Viserys I Targaryen. His reign began in peace and splendor, and his court shone bright as any since it was not long from the Conciliator's rule. Songs were sung of his kindness and his love for celebration, his good humor and open hand. Yet far from King's Landing, in the cold high halls of Runestone, another story quietly continued. Ronan Stone, bastard of the Rhea, turned 6 in that same year. He climbed towers he should not, pestered Maester for books, and learned his letters of the runes, High Valyrian, and even the Old Tongue faster than any other. He could already name all the houses of the kingdoms, even painting their sigils and symbols, 'cause he took up art on the side of his studies as well. The begrudging relatives and the gossipy small folk of Royce lands call him the little bastard who reads too much, but Lady Rhea saw in him something deeper. A spark that would not dim, no matter how the realm tried to deny it. And though the dragons had forgotten him, and the late king had judged him false, she had not. In their shadow, under bronze and stone, the boy grew, as clever as he was curious, as bright as the sun yet cold as the wind that howled through the mountains. For though he bore none of the dragon's prominent silver marks, Ronan of Runestone burned with a quiet fire of his own, one that the world had yet to see. Chapter 7. What an eventful 6 or so years it was, for the kingdoms of Westeros, that is. Deaths after deaths and then new management, just like that. Ronan summarized it simply, even when his passing of the time was actually quite different from the rest of the realm. Pretending to be a baby, then a toddler, and now a little boy wasn't exactly easy. Fortunately, he had his own improvised VR game to kill time. Then again, leaving shit in the butt and drenching oneself in pee isn't anything fun. Even when you feel like some spoiled lord whenever someone else wipes and cleans it out for you. The breastfeeding was something else entirely. Sucking on his mother's was pretty awkward and very Sigmund Freud, but the substituting wet nurses were a treat. Of course, what followed was the crawling around on all fours, then the waddling, and then walking on 2 feet. Like those of his age, he also drooled, he babbled, he imitated, then talked. To reinforce his cover some more, he explored not just the corners of this castle but also the trees, the hills, and trailed behind birds. Admittedly, those latter parts were more fun to do. Exploring his inner child, in a child's body at that. It also helped that Runestone and the landscapes of the Vale were very aesthetic, as long as it wasn't covered by unpredictable winters and plagued by mountain clan attacks. Fortunately, the more indoor activities are exciting to do too. Like spotting the runes of the walls and armors, and reading up on what the maester needs him to learn. And that's not because he was some bookworm nerd into esoteric calligraphy. He was far from it. It's just that the page in his head makes it so worth it. Heaven rewards diligence. Which is as advertised. As long as he puts effort into something, he gets rewarded, so maybe this page was heaven itself. Take his praised and quick mastery of the Old Tongue and High Valyrian for example. Which are rewards from reading books of those languages, over and over and over, cause they sure were hard as can be. But repetition was key. And as long as he puts in some effort, he will be able to make progress. For that kind of diligence, something was due. And in the end, he's eventually able to master the contents of what he's read. Granted, that was not all there is to it. Aside from assisted mastery, the page dishes out its heavenly reward. Which is content and knowledge that is better and very much improved from what was mastered. Writing it out in its empty spaces for him to learn even further, which is logistically weird given that a single page literally fits an entire book's worth and more. Of course, given that it's a reward, it doesn't stay imprinted in the page for long as the text dispersed out from it, and merges into its surrounding space, which is literally his mind. Meaning that he had those improved knowledge swirling about in his head, waiting for him to digest and master again. Quite complex of a cheat, isn't it? In any case, the gist is that it is an aid for diligence, and gifts out much better gains to further be diligent about. A cycle of progress and improvements is what this cheat offered to him. Just like how it was for the booklets of Old Tongues. Sort of an Old Tongue to Common Tongue dictionary that was a common read for Royces, who are required to remember their heritage as first men. With some samples like Magnar is Lord, Skagos is Stone, Sideric is Deceiver, and Wodak Nagran means Squirrel People. Accordingly, with that booklet, Ronan read, reread, and twisted his tongue when reciting such a coarse, harsh, and clanging dialect. However, as soon as he was finally able to speak it like his main language, it was all worth it, cause the page literally awarded him with a book's worth from a booklet. A book of Old Tongues is what swirled in his brain and is what he then transcribed into form after asking the maester for paper and ink. A broken pen is better than the sharpest mind, after all. And he found that it helped quite a lot in mastering these new contents. So, as if possessed by first men who wanted to bring their culture to the modern age, he spelled out new Old Tongue phrases and what they meant in common tongue. Making the elderly scholar understandably suspicious of its validity, but under Lady Rhea's orders, his notes and notes of papers were compiled and bound. Making for a much heftier assignment for future Royce heirs to memorize. A headache that was birthed by Rune and Stone. His pen name that was attached in case they curse him in his grave. And yeah, he is kind of a published author in this world, which is a much better writership standing than his last. By virtue of the page's new improvement cycle, he could even go further and make A Book of Old Tongues, Volume 2. Then again, it was such a waste to use this Goldfinger to just be a glorified historical linguist. Nor did he just want to stop at side hobbies like doodling and painting. Ronan had other plans, far better plans for a more exciting future he had in mind. Chapter 8. Lady Rhea Royce had lived long enough to know that children of 6 name days old did not write books. They barely held quills properly, much less filled pages with sense. And yet, her son had done just that. A Book of Old Tongues, as he titled it. A strange little thing she had the maester bind in simple leather, written in her boy's own careful hand. The maester swore he had only guided the boy through the first pages, then watched, baffled, as Ronan took to the rest on his own. Rhea read it in full one night while her son slept in the next chamber. The words were written clean and certain, with the surety of a man twice, no, thrice his age. He not only translated the coarse old tongue phrases but expanded upon them, drawing lines between meaning and sound, between rune and speech, as if he saw the shape of the language rather than simply learned it. It made her uneasy. And proud. And frightened, all at once. The Royces were of the first men. That much was beyond question. They had kept the old ways longer than most of the Vale, had clung to the runes and the stones when the Undals came with their steel and seven. Every boy and girl of Runestone was taught the old tongue enough to trace their lineage. But none, not Rhea, not her forebears, not even the learned maesters had ever spoken it with the fluency her son now showed. It was as though the words came to him with ease. And then came High Valyrian. Rhea had not wanted him to learn it at first. That was Daemon's tongue, not hers. But the maester insisted it would serve the boy to be versed in both tongues of his supposed blood, and Rhea relented, partly from duty, partly from that quiet, dangerous hope she never quite let die. Perhaps, she thought, if the gods were kind or if those dragons finally realized, then her son might yet find one willing to bond. The Targaryens could consider him a bastard all they wished, but the fire in his blood should not lie. To her surprise, Ronan's progress in High Valyrian was much the same as before, swift, sure, near unnatural. He read aloud with perfect pitch after days, not moons. His notes grew longer, his understanding sharper. The maester said it was a gift. Rhea was not so certain. There was something in him, some hidden spark that the rest of the world had overlooked or forgotten. She saw it clearest when it came to the runes. When she could steal time from her duties, Rhea would take Ronan to the old vaults beneath Runestone, where relics of their ancestors were kept. Chipped blades, cracked shields, and the most prized of all, sets of bronze plate armor etched with runes so old their meaning had been lost to every Royce for generations. It was said that those who wore them could not be cut or pierced. The maesters called it a myth. But Rhea had her doubts. She would watch her son kneel before those relics, tracing the symbols with small fingers, eyes alight with the same curiosity that drove him to words and books. He would hum softly to himself as if the runes were speaking back, and sometimes the air around the bronze would seem different. Once, she swore she saw faint lines shimmer where the old carvings caught the light, like embers that refused to die. At first, Rhea was worried but she did not panic. Instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder and told him to keep his studies of these quiet. The world had grown wary of things it could not explain. And the Royces had no wish to draw the eye of those who feared sorcery as much as they hungered for it. "Keep this between us, my son," she told him. "Some knowledge must live in shadow, or it will not live at all." He nodded, solemn for one so young. Rhea did not know what manner of force had stirred in her child. First men craft, dragon's blood, or something born of both, but she knew it was real. The runes, the words, the fire in his blood. In her heart, she believed this. Whatever gods had denied him his silver hair and royal heritage, mayhaps have given him something else in turn. And beneath the cold stones of Runestone, that gift had begun to wake. Chapter 9. It began as a stick. At least, that's what the small folk thought when they first saw the young bastard of Runestone hurl one into the sea. The boy had been seen often near the cliffs, whittling away at bits of wood. The maester said he'd taken an interest in carpentry after asking for books about the craft. The servants whispered that it was another of his strange fascinations, like the old runes or the dead tongues he read aloud to himself. Lady Rhea only smiled when asked, saying her son was simply curious. But one morning, as the mists rolled in from the surroundings, the boy threw his odd and bent stick over the waters, and the stick actually came back. It wasn't just a trick of the wind, though many thought it at first. He threw again, farther this time, and once more, the wooden curve circled in the air and spun straight back into his hand. The small folk gathered along the port walls gasped, clasping themselves and muttering prayers. "Witchcraft," someone whispered. "Magic," said another. "Clever hands," said an onlooking wise man, squinting hard to make sense of it. In any case, word spread fast. The bastard boy had made a toy that defied reason. A stick that returned to its master. He called it a boomerang, a name no one had ever heard before. Before long, half the children of Runestone wanted one. Ronan Stone perhaps felt generous and showed many how to shape the wood and bend it just right. Some he carved himself for the children he knew, the sons of knights and relatives he knew of House Royce. Others he left to the woodcraftsmen of runestone lands, who began copying his multitude of designs, encouraging them to make changes to its size and color. So, the wood-chipping small folk began to trade them, paint them when they have dye, race them across the wind. Fishermen swore by them for practice throwing nets, and grown men used them for fun in their idle hours. Even the maester wrote a small scroll describing the toy's flight, calling it a study in balance and force unseen in any Westerosi design. He sent his notes to the citadel, hoping the archmaesters might take notice. They did, and the Boomerang of Runestone was recorded in the annals as a new curiosity of the Vale. A toy born from the hands of a boy too young, by rights, to craft anything so precise and marvelous. Of course, there were doubters. Merchants from Gulltown claimed they'd seen something similar across the narrow sea. A sellsword swore the Summer Islanders had such toys for sport. Even a maester from the Arbor argued that such a thing must have come from Essos, not the Vale. A few muttered darker things, that the toy moved by unseen power, that the bastard boy's cursed blood gave the wood its life. Lady Rhea heard those whispers and worried. For a short while, she even wondered if the toy was touched by the same force that made his runes shimmer. But after hearing her son explain the craft, the shape, the curve, the air, she was at ease. No spells. No fire. Just thought and diligence. Still, she made him promise to keep quiet about how easily it came to him. The world fears what it cannot understand. She reminded the boy. Let them think it's skill and ingenuity, and you'll be safe. However, the craze didn't stop there. Traders carried the boomerangs farther west, then south, until they reached the courts of other lords. Nobles in the Reach and the Riverlands bought them for their children. The little maiden of the Eyrie herself was said to have one, gifted from Runestone as a curiosity. Even King's Landing heard of it. When the tale reached the Red Keep, King Viserys reportedly chuckled and a seed of doubt lingered in his head. All the while that his daughter, the young Princess Rhaenyra, was said to have begged for one and spent an afternoon throwing it across the gardens until her septa made her stop. As for Daemon Targaryen, when he heard it was his wife's bastard's invention, he actually smirked. None knowing what it truly meant. On the other hand, Rhea never cared for their thoughts. She just saw what they could not, that in her son's hands, even a bit of carved wood could become something wondrous. And in the quiet evenings of Runestone, she watched him throw that first boomerang again and again, catching it clean each time, smiling faintly as it spun back through the salt air. Mastering it quick into something that was more than his toy. Maybe even a weapon. For most, it really might just be his toy. But for her, it was proof that her son could make things return. Chapter 10. Oh geez, is how Ronan reacted to the people's reaction. 'Cause he thought that it was a bit much. It was just a boomerang, after all. Then again, he kind of expected this to happen. For whenever he plans of dropping his fanfic characters in any backwards medieval settings, something like the boomerang is what he drafts up. It kind of helped him that this thing is not at all actually prevalent in Westeros, and he took an unexpected advantage. For even he thought that the words of his unknown detractors had some weight to them, that the boomerangs could very well be already existent in Essos and beyond. In any case, he sought to maximize the first introducer benefits, drawing up and designing and building boomerangs that he gave away. But in secret, he was optimizing diligence, so that heaven rewards him with better designs and great boomerang crafting capabilities. A gift of both knowledge and skill, which he then shared with whoever is skilled with the wood in the territory, pushing it onto them like the empty sponge of ideas that they are, to create an industry and earn all the monies. However pitiful it was, it is still money. From one-wing boomerangs to six-wing boomerangs and onwards. Even the weird and inexplicably shaped ones are part of what is to be traded. To establish Runestone as the place of the foremost boomerang makers of the realm against eventual copycats. With more designs to come as long as Ronan does his diligence. Maybe even weapon-worthy boomerangs, like shuriken-shaped ones, weirdly curved axes, or even an ultra-flattened Mjolnir. Which is why he allocated some time to also master the fun toy, to be like Sokka or even Captain Boomerang himself. But that is just a distracting idea in of itself, for his real intention was truly to learn the craft of woodwork and carving. So, the smart thing to do was also move on to other woody creations. To wow Westeros and earn some fame and influence on the side, through the introduction of unique stuff he knew from his previous world. Before long, when Runestone's woodcarvers thought they had seen the peak of the bastard boy's odd inventions, another strange toy took to the air. This one did not return. It flew true, smooth, and swift, then simply fell, meant to be caught by another's hand. The small folk called it the flat wheel at first, a round wooden plate no larger than a man's helm, light and thin with its edges curved just so. But the boy, Ronan Stone, called it a frisbee. He showed the children how it was meant to be played, not alone this time, but together. One throws, the other catches. A toy of shared laughter, not skill or sorcery. And just like that, another wave swept through Runestone, and beyond. The older men marveled at how steady it flew, the maester once again scrawled his notes about air and balance, and the women of the household smiled to see their children play without fear of splinters or bruises. A non-returning boomerang, they called it. Safer, simpler, yet somehow more delightful. Before long, the flying disc of the Vale was being carved up in Gulltown and other woodworking lands alike. The expected imitators who wanted a piece of the boomerang and now this new one. But Runestone's innovation still got a leg up with colored designs, albeit in vain. It didn't take long for fainted discs of all colors were traded at where they should be traded, sometimes engraved with the sigils of houses, making even some knights be seen trying their hand at the odd toy and its accompanying sport. But with this second creation came greater whispers. Of what would lies inside the bastard of Runestone's mind? Does he dream in strange shapes? Is this child touched by some craft beyond reason, or is he simply mad? Some unburdened maesters debated in their letters, some insisting the boy was merely gifted, others wondering if lost knowledge of the first men or even Valyrian art ran in his veins. But those were worries from the speculative and crazy. Nevertheless, the reach of the bastard boy's toy stretched farther still. Even in King's Landing, where the boomerang craze had yet to die down, the tale of the new toy reached the Red Keep. Where the Princess Rhaenyra, curious as ever, is said to have acquired a frisbee for herself. When it arrived, under royal changes, it became a polished ashwood disc with the sigil of House Targaryen etched upon its face. She was said to have spent an entire afternoon tossing it across the gardens. The young Alicent Hightower, ever her companion, joined in the play. Even Queen Aemma herself is reported to have laughed from her seat as the two girls chased after the spinning disc, their laughter echoing off the Red Keep's stones. And so, with royalty admiring it, others soon followed with scrutiny and curiosity. And so, while the maesters wrote of mechanics and the small folk talked of miracles, the realm once more turned their attention to Bastard of Runestone, a child with a mind of wood, winds, and whimsy. Chapter 11. By the time the flying discs of the Vale had reached even the cobbled courts of King's Landing, Ronan Stone was already knee-deep in his next creations. Runestone's workshops had grown noisy, saws, lathes, and laughter mingled freely. The boomerangs still flew. The frisbee still spun. Yet the bastard's mind, restless as ever, turned toward circles once more. Only this time, the circle would not fly. The next of them was nothing but a ring, smooth, round, and large enough to fit around a grown woman's waist, thrice over. What, exactly, does it do? Other than being a waste of what should be a flimsy wheel for a carriage. Apparently, like the wheel, it circles, endlessly, if one is good enough to do so. A claim that earned chuckles and raised brows alike. The hula hoop, as the bastard boy called it, was deemed strange and frivolous by others, neither toy nor sport nor art. Most of Runestone's folk and curious people beyond thought the boy had finally made something useless. Children preferred the flying toys. Men preferred tools and weapons. And women, though amused, had better things to do than sway and twirl a ring of wood about their hips. The hula hoop should have gathered dust for a time, turning into a forgotten oddity stacked behind shelves of unsold curiosities. But fashions in Westeros were as fickle as the sea winds that brushed the Vale. It began with one lass, who, out of boredom or curiosity, tried the strange ring again and found herself laughing when it actually stayed up and spun. Then another joined in. Then another. Before long, word spread among the land's young ladies that the toy trimmed the waist and kept the hips light. That, of course, was never proven, yet gossip needs no proof. By the next moon, merchants in Gulltown were selling runestone slimming rings, at a tidy markup. Wooden circles painted gold or wrapped in ribbons became the newest fascination of noble girls who wanted to be a bit more dynamic. Some even claimed it helps improve dance and motion, with finding the rhythm and all that. The bastard boy did not argue with the false rumor. If it sold, and he may even be the one who started all these untruthful claims. But while the little ladies and girls spun their circles, the boys weren't too keen on it. Fortunately, it would seem that the stone bastard had another wooden craft up his sleeve. And so came the takraw. It began with a few scraps of unique rattan wood and cane, woven together into a small, hollow sphere. A ball light enough to carry and firm enough to kick. apparently used to practice juggling with one's feet, and then to volley it against walls. Afterwards, it could be kicked and passed around to other like-minded kickers. And a game could then be played. With rules set by the ingenious bastard who introduced it. Which is the kick volley that it came to be. Or just takraw, like how the used ball is called. A game of feet, reflexes, and acrobatic grace. Children in the villages began playing it between fences and farm walls. And before long, Runestone's youths were holding proper matches, 2 teams, 1 ball, no hands. Only skill. It became a sport of camaraderie, where bruises were earned with laughter and victory shared in sweat and smiles. Soon, some young lords of the Vale and beyond could be seen partaking, jesting that it trained them for battle and balance alike. It's hard not to partake when the takraw are disseminated their way, and when there's not much else to do. Thus, in another 2 rounds of creations, the bastard of Runestone had once again reshaped the amusements of the realm. A hoop that rolled around the hips. A sphere that danced between feet. And from the mind of a boy not yet grown came diversions that spread faster than songs. The maesters and masters-at-arms wondered what would come next, what other oddities the boy might pull from his head. How he'll distract the young ones that they're supposed to be teaching and training, with all these whimsical nonsense. Though it was now clear that the bastard was something else. Where others saw wood and air, he saw movement. Where others played with toys, he made the toys and shaped their joys himself. Chapter 12. Before the wooden rings had finished circling the hips of half the noble girls in the Vale, and the takraw balls were being volleyed across courtyards from Gulltown and beyond, the bastard of Runestone had moved on again. His mind was never still. If there was wood to shape, string to pull, or air to test, he was there, carving, tying, whittling. And soon enough, the workshops of Runestone began to echo with a new sound. A sharp whir, a sudden clack, followed by laughter, cheers, and sometimes a pained ow. For Ronan Stone had introduced the trompo. Or wooden spinning tops. A toy of battles and whimsy both, nothing more than a lump of carved wood with a nail at its point and a string wound around its body from the middle. But in the hands of one who knew how to flick and pull, the trompo would leap, spin, and dance across the ground like a living thing. It was the children who were fascinated first, of course. Passionately learning how to wind the string, how to release it with a snap of the wrist, and mayhaps how to catch it again in the palm before it fell still. Simple fun, or so it seemed. Until the clever bastard introduced how to make it a challenge. How one spin master can take on others in a battle. 2 or more trompos spun, collided, and chipped where the iron points met. The winner was the last one standing, the one who bested the others, damaging them to varying degrees. These losers, well, they could always carve another or buy new ones. Soon enough, spinning top fights became an interesting way to pass the time across the kingdoms. Courtyards rang with the hum of spinning wood and clattering points, and wagers were even made by grown men over whose top would outlast the rest. Ronan himself could only sigh when the maester scolded him about the hazardous entertainments he'd unleashed upon the realm. To ease their worries, the boy apparently made a smaller, gentler version, blunt-tipped, light, meant for babes and toddlers. He called them dreidels. These ones bore letters on each side, symbols that the child might spin to learn words, numbers, and fortune. Not half as thrilling as the trompos, but enough to make nursemaids smile and mothers sigh in relief. But the true wonder came next. Not a toy that spun danced upon the earth, but one that soared. It began with a frame of wood, light and sturdy, covered with thin hide stretched tight. Sometimes made of cloth that is thin and sturdy. Tied a long string, and only need to wait for the winds of the Vale to stir, and let go. And the kite took flight. Like the kite bird that is known in the realm. At first, the onlookers gasped. Then they cheered, for the small, trembling thing rose higher and higher, its tail fluttering like a banner. The bastard boy guided it from below, tugging the string so that it dipped, turned, and soared again. A bird made by man's hand. The maester nearly dropped his quill watching it. The assigned knights almost left their posts to gape. Even Lady Rhea smiled as the shape cut against the pale blue sky. Word spread like wildfire across the realm. Soon, there were kites of every kind, square, diamond, round, and strange. Some painted with house sigils, others with beasts, dragons, or moons. The winds of Runestone's hills became a playground for colors and dreams. And then, inevitably, came kite duels. 2 flyers would cross strings in the sky, each trying to cut the other's line. When one kite fell, the crowd would roar in triumph. When both tangled and crashed, laughter echoed for leagues. In a realm where only Targaryens could fly dragons, the kite became quite the interest. A symbol that even common hands could command the winds, if only for a moment. Even if it is still from the ground. Making the small folk say the bastard of Runestone had stolen a secret from the skies. The maesters wrote of him as the bastard boy who made the air his canvas. And a few lords, half in jest and half in awe, began to call him the boy who taught men to fly. His name spread farther than the king's own in whispers. For while the new king Viserys ruled the Iron Throne, Ronan Stone ruled something stranger, the hearts and imaginations of the realm itself. Almost even overshadowing the 7-year-old princess who rode her dragon so young. But beneath the cold stones of Runestone, the boy only smiled, carving yet another shape the world had not seen before. Perhaps for him, innovations and progress like these were still far from enough. Especially when there are so many more to come. Chapter 13. It was the duty of the maester to record the deeds of Runestone, and in his long years of service, he had written of many things, births, deaths, harvests, treaties, and even battles. Yet none puzzled him more than the growing curiosity that was the young Ronan Stone, as known by others. Even when privately, he is treated as a Royce while the maester himself considers the boy Targaryen. In any case, the boy's mind, he thought, moved faster than any other, and yet the boy's hands somehow also managed to keep pace. When the child had come to him first, asking for books on carpentry and woodcraft, the maester had thought it a passing whim. Many children took up interests on the side, only to drop them when they found the work harder than it seemed. But the child Ronan was different. He did not read for the sake of reading. He absorbed. Within days, he spoke of tools with the confidence of a grown craftsman, chisel, awl, plane, rasp, and lathe, his questions sharp and well-placed, his memory frighteningly clear. And soon, theory turned to practice. The maester would watch from the corner of the courtyard, quill in hand, as the boy took up scraps of wood and shaped them, shaving off slivers and chips until his vision came alive in his palm. The first triumph had been that curious stick that returned to its thrower, the boomerang as it was named. The realm had already gone mad for that one. But for Ronan, it was only the beginning. Before long, another toy took shape. A small half-dome of wood, curved and polished, that spun in one direction and stubbornly refused to turn in the other. The maester had seen it with his own eyes. How, no matter how hard one tried, the little piece would right itself and spin the way it wished. Ronan called it the rattleback. The maester had studied its motion for hours, muttering to himself about balance, shape, and the strange harmony between motion and form. It defies common sense, he noted, yet the boy claims it does not defy reason. Everyone else who had gotten a glimpse of the curiosity was less patient with reason. They simply called it another of the Stone Boy's enchanted toys. Alas, it wasn't as popular as the others, only a small curiosity that didn't make much of a wave. So, then came the more dynamic and popular ones, from the frisbees, the hula hoops, the tops and dreidels, designs unseen before in the Vale. Some with pointed shafts that whirled on tables, others made to wobble and right themselves like dancers on a stage. They were not merely toys, they were tests of motion, the maester realized. Including the kick-volley ball and the kites. And once again, the child's mind continued to the next. From curved toys to blocks, rectangular, even, and smooth to the touch. Dozens of them, near identical in measure, which he stacked in columns and rows. The maester thought him building a wall or tower, but then the boy explained the game, pull the blocks out one by one without letting the stack fall. Ronan called it Jenga. Another curious word. When the maester sent word of this to the citadel, he expected polite dismissal. Instead, a reply came, a brief note of intrigue from an archmaester, who remarked it as a study of human patience and structure. Soon after, there were whispers that even the royal household in King's Landing had taken to it. The young Princess Rhaenyra and her friend Alicent were said to spend afternoons testing their nerve and steady hands with the blocks of runestone make. Which was enough to make Jenga spread as another game of fun and folly across the kingdoms. Added to the list of many before it. But Ronan was not done. He made thinner planks next. Building planks. Which the maester heard the boy muttered them to be. Kiva and Kapla but not Legos. Truly odd words one could not place in any tongue. Granted, the boy used them not just for play, but for private creation. Bridges, towers, halls, and miniature citadels without a single nail or clay holding them together. These building planks seemed far more versatile than stone masonry, as it is said that the new king has set himself to build a model of old Valyria. Still, it is no doubt that the boy was already learning the principles of architecture through these methods. And in the far tomorrow, these little constructions might just be constructed in Royce lands. Then came the miniatures. Tiny figures, carved with such care that their faces bore expression: soldiers, knights, ladies, even jesters. Wooden likenesses of Runestone's people, uncanny and artful. There are even characters that the maester could not name. Then, as if that were not enough, Ronan made the next iterations of these statuettes move. Like the nutcracker which actually crushes nuts. And through strings and hinges, his other wooden creations actually dance. Though wooden toys and puppets are not exactly original, but the boy getting to make them at this young of age is what's noteworthy. In any case, the maester thought that might have been the end of it, until one day, he was called to the port to witness the boy's latest curiosity. Little boats of wood. It wasn't clear if they had accurate interior hulls, but those curved prows and fitted sails of cloth stitched by a seamster's hands sell the illusion. Then the boy placed them into the port's waters, and to the onlooker's shock, they floated, balanced and swift. It was not long before he made more, one with twin hulls, another with weighted stones to steady the keel. With designs much more sleek and sometimes even bigger. Many fishermen and docked captains were impressed. While the maester was alarmed. A boy of almost 7 name days should not know the secrets of floating on seawater better than grown users of boats and ships. But mayhaps this will serve as the foundation, because it was no secret that the boy had ambition for the seas and to build real ships of his own. And as if the waters were not enough, the boy did not forget about the land. Where he saw to crafting small wooden carts, with the simplest being flat boards on wheels, narrow and light. After which, he would set them at the top of a hill and let them roll while the onlooking children cheering as they raced down the slope. He called them cars, and he planned to call future races a derby. Calling on the other young ones to try to make their own. Using these cars of their own to participate in the competition. A way to encourage the budding woodworkers of the Royces to hone their craft. So young yet already thinking of strategic moves like this, on a crafting industry that he himself has spurned with his genius. At first, the maester thought it was mere passing interest, or even a unique obsession, only later did it become clear that there was something greater forming in that young mind. Ronan was building his world, piece by piece, from wood. The maester, in his quiet candlelit chambers, often found himself writing more than he ought. His chronicles had grown thick with the boy's inventive progress, and he sometimes feared that he was recording the beginning of something too large for ink to hold. He wrote one final note on the last page of the account of those young years. About how the boy's mastery of wood is not unlike his grasp of letters, complete, unsettling, and wondrous. If this is what he makes with timber, then the realm should tremble when he turns to stone and steel, or the more familiar bronze of his house. For the supposed bastard of runestone carved more than toys. Ronan Stone carved a legend in the making. Chapter 14. The boy had changed. Or temporarily changed his focus at the very least. Ronan, Rhea's son of 7 name days, no longer filled the halls with the sound of hammer or chisel, nor the smell of freshly carved wood. The moons before, it seemed that every corner of Runestone and beyond echoed his name, the maester talking of his craft, children laughing at his toys, and even nobles from the Vale sending word to see the boy who made the stick that returns, up until the tower of tumbling blocks. But after his 7th name day, he grew quiet. Perhaps he has had his fill of being marveled at, or perhaps fame had become a burden to him. For now. Whatever the cause, Ronan's work seemed to no longer seek the attention of others. His hands were still busy, always busy, but his manner was different. The boy who once shared his creations so freely now kept his labors close, speaking less and thinking more. Rhea did not press him. Children grow in strange ways, and a mother learns when to let the tide take its course. Of course, before that quiet turn, he startled the household and the locals again, this time not with flying wood, but with his own body riding the waves. He called it surfing, using a long, smooth board of his own make. Rhea remembered the gasps of the fisherfolk who watched him glide over the sea's edge like a seabird too bold for its wings. They spoke of sorcery, of sea sprites carrying him, but she knew better. It was another craft, balance, and that same stubborn curiosity that had always lived in him. And yet, after the murmurs rose, he left the board and the sea behind. Apparently, a nasty wipeout happened to him and he felt it was better to visit that when he's much older. Or more skilled. Which were both a matter of time. Still, a title as the first wave rider became spoken around, as many other wave riders followed in the path he paused at. Trying and eventually achieving something that they could. Mostly locals of Royce lands, as surfing the surfboard never got too much exposure elsewhere, surfing was that much harder to learn than tying the top and kicking the takraw. In any case, that was when clay took the place of timber for Ronan's developments. He began with mud, common, unremarkable mud, and shaped it with his hands as if it were something precious. The maester told her that the boy had requested books on pottery and kiln work, and that he spent his mornings in the courtyard, molding and turning the soft clay while the maester watched with a mix of curiosity and bewilderment. It was curious, truly. To think he had mastered the ways of carving hardwood long before touching something so pliant. It was as if he had walked backward into simplicity, unmaking his own difficulty. Still, the pots he made were beautiful. The first ones were unspeakable, but after only a number of tries, he was shaping beauty. Some tall and narrow, others wide and patterned. He painted them, etched designs upon them, and then filled them with soil. For gardening. It seemed a humble pursuit, too plain for a boy of his mind, but her boy made it into something else entirely. The pots were not only vessels for plants, they were hosts for symbols. It was the runes of the house. Since the time of the Bronze Kings and First Men. He carved them on the inner sides before laying the soil over them, as though the dirt might hide their meaning. Trying to appease herself, who always said he must keep that part of him hidden. But a mother sees what she must, but she said nothing. If he wished to play at magic, then let him. Every Royce child should at least toy with the thought of the old ways. He treated the act as his first true experiment. Whether the runes had any direct power, she could not tell, yet. The plants did grow, though no faster or brighter than before. Still, he watched them like a maester with his glass, writing notes and scratching drawings. Before long, he had written an entire book, or several small ones, about the plant variety itself and his miniature gardens. He wrote under the name Rune and Stone again. Why that name, Rhea cannot say. Perhaps it was his way of tying himself to two worlds, the mystic and the mundane, his Royce part and his attached bastardy. When she asked him once why he bothered with such small plants, he said it was for the cold days, and that runes were fickle. They needed weirwood and other magical materials to make anything happen, and that maybe his time as this Ronin potter was a lost cause. Yet not entirely. The boy was young, but not without foresight. He spoke of vegetables that could grow in winter, of herbs that could thrive indoors. He spoke of keeping the green alive even when the frost comes. Rhea cannot say that she understood all of it, but she saw something that was always in his eyes, a quiet planning, a sense of purpose beyond play. In the moons before his 8th name day, he became both potter and plotter. It was not any toy to amuse the realm but hid a craft that was something subtler, something living, partly mystical. Whether it was childish futility or the first spark of something greater, Rhea thought it might be both or nothing at all. But she learned this much: when Ronan turns his mind to something, the realm should have done well to take notice. For where others see mere dirt and clay, her son sees the shape of what may yet come. Chapter 15. Sir Gerald Royce had known battle. He had ridden against the painted men of the mountains, those savage clans who came down in their hundreds to raid the Vale's villages and farms. He had fought on cold slopes and in narrow passes, with steel and shield, against foes who fought like wild wolves, quick, cruel, and without honor. And though the battles were small by the reckoning of the realm, they were enough to forge him. He was a man of runestone through and through. Bronze and oath, duty and honor, these were the words he lived by. It was not in him to question his tasks, though there were times he could not help but grumble in private. Especially now, with Lady Rhea. His cousin. His eventual liege. Headstrong, proud, unbending as the stone she ruled from. He had respect for her strength, a rare kind among women, rarer still among Royces, yet there were days he longed for the simpler order of a lord commanding and a knight obeying. But these were not simple times. In the Eyrie ruled a girl, Lady Jane Eyre, still in her youth. His uncle, Lord Hubert Royce, served as regent, old, weary, and not long for this world. It was said he barely rose from his bed now, his body giving in, though his will had not. Soon, the weight of runestone would pass to Rhea. Gerald knew this, as did every knight and bannerman in their halls. He had his doubts, yes, but he kept them close. A Royce does not show division before others. And so when Rhea told him that her son, the boy of many names, Ronan Stone to some, Ronan Royce to her, would be his to train, Gerald simply bowed. It was his duty, and duty was reason enough. The boy's fame had reached far beyond the Vale. The maester wrote of him as a prodigy, the stone boy who carved wonders and made even lords of the realm bemused with toys of his own design. But Gerald was not a man for clever hands and pretty playthings. He believed a man's worth was measured in his stance, his strength, and his sword arm. Still, he was not blind to the strangeness of the task. A bastard, even a bright one, was not often given the honor of squiring beneath the heir's own kin. But Rhea had made it plain. He will train here, she said. Among his blood. For no one beyond Runestone will take him. Gerald had not argued. He had seen what others whispered, that the boy's name and rise had stirred unease. Especially now that Daemon Targaryen had cast Rhea aside, his marriage dissolved by the king's will. That alone was a wonder in itself. Never before had a marriage of House Royce ended so, not by widowhood or the sword, but by decree. Making Gerald wonder if that Daemon had schemed for it from the start, that all his cruelty and mockery of his veiled wife had been to win that freedom. If so, then the boy Ronan was both curse and symbol, the unwanted link between dragon and bronze. Some called him the bastard who broke the match. Gerald had no love for Daemon, but neither did he think it wise to speak such words. Still, he wondered. Rhea swore that the boy was Daemon's. He believed her, she was too proud to lie of such a thing. And when he looked at Ronan, he could see something there that was not wholly Royce. It was not in his hair, but in his eyes, his purple-laced grey gaze. Regardless, Gerald accepted the task. From that year forth, he would teach the boy the way of the bronze. He would learn the weight of a sword, the balance of a jousting lance, the stance of a knight of the Vale. When the boy took his first lesson, Gerald saw no cringing weakness. None of that Maester Ly aptitude dampened the boy's entrance into the way of arms. He saw control. Restraint. The kind that comes from patience rather than fear. Again and again, the boy struck with precision, not power, and when corrected, he listened. In time, he came to see that the boy's measure was study. Ronan learned every motion before he made it, as though every strike was a puzzle to solve. He was no brute, but neither was he frail. The strength came, slowly, as it should, but the focus was there from the start. After nothing less than 100 trying swings, the boy actually mastered a motion and incorporated it into his growing skill with the blade. And though Gerald did not say it aloud, he began to think that this strange boy might yet honor both sides of his blood. The dragon for half of the blood, and the bronze for the potential of the body. So began the next turning in the life of Runestone's heir that was and was not. The clever hands that once carved toys now gripped steel, and the quiet mind that once built blocks and pots began to learn the craft of battle. Gerald Royce had seen many training squires in his life. But none, he thought, would be quite like this one. He would make a bronze knight of the boy as ordered of him, but even so, he felt that this boy had his own making to be something else entirely. Either way, it would be worth the watch. Worth all the guidance. And yeah, Ronan himself was training and whatnot now. Of course, it must be noted that he wasn't really an athletic guy. Nor was he into honing his physicality. He was pretty much a couch potato at best. Either doom-scrolling or watching movies in his downtime, while his most productive mode is when he's writing, lying down in his bed while doing so. So, he really should be quite far from this prodigy of a squire that Runestone knights and other squires were eyeing, murmuring about. Fortunately, he had a cheat and it was as effective to martial methods just as how it worked with knowledge. As long as he made an effort and got his reps in, he's bound to have some gains. With a corrective and improved insight rewarded after a certain threshold. The page in his head didn't discriminate. Accordingly, after changing his skins from being a linguist, an author, an artist, a rune apprentice, a wood craftsman, a captain boomeranger, a toy maker, a plank builder, a pot maker, and a gardener of a botanist. It also didn't take long for him to be a more than steady squire with unmatched wood swordmanship. For heaven rewards diligence. Heaven rewards his diligence, indeed. Chapter 16. Of course, as someone with progressive aspirations, Ronan wasn't satisfied that it was just him alone that was getting better and better. Which is why while he's at it, he's thinking of reforms to be done alongside his fellow knights in training. Even as a young lord with very sus claims, these knights represent his power, and they need to be more than just fighters wearing very noticeable bronze. A transformation and reform was in order, using ideas he could remember from his old life and maybe pestering the maester some more for books on raising armies. Then books on leadership, command, fostering loyalty, and all that. Of course, he also had to multitask, given that he planned to not stop his learning of other disciplines. All in all, Ronan was going to be very busy, but with the page, it should be acceptable. More than rewarding even. It began with him, that one boy. That one boy who just refused to be ordinary. Willem Royce had grown up among the clangor of steel and the scent of sweat and dust. Training yards were as common to him as prayer halls. But what had always been routine, ritual even, began to shift when the bastard of Runestone, Ronan Stone, took to the grounds in earnest. The change was quiet at first. Subtle. A few longer hours here, a few new drills there. But before long, the whole yard began to move differently. He was just a boy like many his age, yet he trained like a man possessed. There was rhythm in his motions, a strange patience that none of them had. Every strike, every parry, was deliberate, as though he saw the art of war as something to be studied rather than merely endured. The knights had mocked him at first. How could they not? A boy famed for carving toys and clever trinkets, suddenly telling men twice his age to run, stretch, and sing. Yet they followed. Gods help them, they followed. Because it worked. Soon, the training yards of Runestone were alive before dawn. While the rooster still crowed and the sea breeze bit through the mist, the knights and squires gathered. They began with stretches. Something no Royceman had ever thought to do before battle. Ronan said it, lessened the strain, and though most didn't understand how, they soon noticed that soreness faded faster and fewer men were laid up with pulled muscles. Then came the running, not just a few laps about the yard, but full jogs across the coastal roads and cliffs of Runestone. They ran past the fishing ports and over the old bronze causeways, boots thudding in unison, the breath of 100 men rising like fog. To keep the rhythm, Ronan had them sing. He called it cadence, some strange foreign word that caught on quickly. And of them all, one song became Willem's favorite, the marching chant known as, "Come on over." Which went like, "Come on over. The war's not over. So put your weapon next to mine. And we'll beat 'em all down the line. I hacked Insurgent 1. Did that one just for fun. So put your weapon next to mine. And we'll beat 'em all down the line. Come on over. The war's not over. So put your weapon next to mine. And we'll beat 'em all down the line. I sliced Insurgent 2. Did that one just for you. So put your weapon next to mine. And we'll beat 'em all down the line. I cut Insurgent 3. Did that one just for me. So put your weapon next to mine. And we'll beat 'em all down the line. Come on over. The war's not over. So put your weapon next to mine. And we'll beat 'em all down the line. They all sang it in chorus, their voices rising over the surf, echoing through the cliffs. Willem thought it foolish at first, singing while training, but then realized how effective it was. It unified them. Kept the line together, the pace even, the morale high. No one fell behind when the rhythm carried them. That was what made Ronan's methods work, Willem decided, they made men want to move together. The songs, the drills, the constant improvement, none of it felt like labor when it was done as one body. And Ronan kept improving things. Gods, he never stopped. Running soon turned into weighted runs, hauling stones up the steep ridges of the vale, forging endurance on the same slopes that once forged bronze. Then came swimming lessons. At first, many balked. Knights were not sailors, after all. But Runestone thrived on its ports, its fleets, its coastal holds, and Ronan said a man who could not swim had no place defending the sea. So they swam. They learned to row, to fish, to haul nets. They became seafaring warriors in truth, fit to defend the tides as well as the mountains. It did not stop there. There were the strange push-ups, where men lowered their bodies to the ground and raised them again until their arms trembled. The pull-ups, where they hung from iron bars until their strength failed after lifting up their own bodies many times over. And many other exercises that targeted some body part and honed it. Even the legs, as leg days are said to be just as important. In any case, there were also weighted lifts, where they raised great stones or heavy and special-shaped irons again and again. Ronan said these built the muscle, and though few knew how that made sense, none could deny its results. Every knight in Runestone began to stand straighter. Strike harder. Endure longer. Even the veterans, men like Ser Gerald and Gunther Royce, the bronze giant, had taken notice. The old guard scoffed at first, but once they saw the younger knights and even the training squires lasting longer in sparring bouts, they quietly began to adopt the same habits. And then came the weapons. Wherein Ronan was a master of them all. Even the designated master-at-arms had to call him Grandmaster-at-arms as no jape. The yard rang with his lessons on sword and shield, axe and spear, dagger and hammer, even the bow. His methods were precise and measured, with each weapon studied like a discipline of its own. He broke them down to motions, angles, ranges, momentum, so that even the most stubborn squires found themselves improving. he taught not only how to strike, but why the strike worked. Knife-throwing contests became a daily practice. Splitting wood with the axe turned from a chore to a drill. Using hammers to help with building, using said hammers and clashing it against molten metals, to train warhammering. But maybe it's just to use able bodies for anything they could be needed. Especially the buildings, restoration, and what else Ronan needed from them. Ships most foremost. And there are even unarmed training, fists, grapples, stances, all honed beneath his eye. To train as though you will one day be unarmed, which was Ronan's reasoning. Apparently, a knight's worth is not in his weapon, but in his will. And Willem took that to heart. So, they fought with hands, elbows, knees, and feet, a system he was apparently reverse engineering called the art of 8 limbs. If restricted by half of that, he taught kickboxing among the other so-called martial arts he's still coming up with. And if restricted even further, they continued with just fists, with a style that was mostly boxing. Yet their strengthening of their skills and body seemed not enough. As Ronan had them trained in games of wit, from the simple checkers, the complicated chess, to the more familiar saivas. And drilled them in discipline, virtue, and the so-called ethics of men. Each was expected to live by a code of chivalry beyond the mere words of vows that Vale knights live by. Reciting rules like scripture, from the 10 Commandments and counting. Before long, 4 years passed, and Runestone changed. Where once there had been only proud knights of bronze, now there stood a growing army, leaner, sharper, stronger. About 1,000 men bore the rune of House Royce, and their fame spread beyond the Vale. Bards sang of their discipline, of the bronze order that moved as one, whose chants shook the coast and whose endurance never failed. Willem watched it all unfold, half in awe, half in disbelief. Runestone had always been strong. Now it was formidable. Feared among the mountain clans and maybe even the Vale's bannermen. And it all began with the boy they once called Bastard. The Bastard of Bronze. Willem often thought of what a wise man said once, long ago, that some men follow tradition because it made us great. Others change it because they wish to make us greater still. Ronan Stone, it seemed, was the latter. And what Willem considered the Bronze Age of Runestone had begun from here on out. Chapter 17. Gerald remembered the first time the so-called Bronze Order took to war, and it was when the snows had only just begun to melt. The mountain clans came down as they always did when the thaw came, hungry, desperate, and wild. 3 named tribes of them were seen that spring. The scarred skins from the eastern slopes, men who scarred their own bodies to show they feared no pain. The Crowtooth kin from the high passes, who wore talons around their necks and adorned themselves with dark feathers. And the stone vultures, who made their camps upon old ruins and picked at the dead after every battle, believing they took the fallen's strength for themselves. They came in hundreds. Driven not by conquest, but by hunger. The developing ports of Runestone were rich with salted meats, grains, and dried fish, all that the mountains and its wild inhabitants lacked. By the time word reached the castle, the clans had already begun to raid the outlying hamlets. Fires burned across the coast, and smoke rose like banners. The alerted Lady Rhea called her knights and men, and under her command rode Ser Gerald himself, alongside Ser Gunther, and her young son, Ronan Stone. It was his first true battle as the known commander and builder of the Bronze Order. In any case, the men were ready. Their drills had long prepared them for this day. They formed ranks upon the misty shore, shields overlapping, spears braced, their swords at the ready. Meanwhile, the mountain clans screamed and charged from down the hills. The ranks of bronze met them head-on. While Ronan's orders were crisp and simple. No shouting. No frenzy. Advance, brace, strike. Every man moved as if bound to the next by a chain. With the savages breaking before others even knew it. Their chieftains slain, their odd pride trampled, and their wounded taken to the prisons. Perhaps only their babes and ill were left behind, in wherever crevice of the mountains they settled. The ports were saved, and the name Bronze Order was spoken with awe throughout the ports. But it would not be the last time they proved themselves. The second came only moons later, this time from the sea. Pirates out of the stepstones, flying false Lycine colors, had come to plunder Runestone's trade. Their ships appeared on the horizon at dawn, 13 strong, their sails striped and their decks crawling with cutthroats. Perhaps thinking that the shores of Bronze were easy compared to Gull Town. Unfortunately for them, the young Ronan had prepared for this. He had men who could swim, who could row, who could fight upon deck and wave alike. The order became a navy, using the very ships they had become the unwitting shipwrights of. Nonetheless, the sea battle lasted only a while. The young Ronin fought the quickest, cutting through the enemy lines with a calm no older knight could muster. Gerald remembered it clear, the crash of ships, the ringing of steel, the smoke of burning woods adrift. When the tide turned, the pirates tried to flee, but the waters ran red behind them. Not one escaped. That day, Runestone's ports became known as a trap for sea raiders. The local bards styled it as the day the Bronze ruled their waters. And Gerald, watching the young lord standing drenched upon the dock, thought to himself, this is what the old kings of Bronze must have looked like. Only a few years passed, and Runestone's power clearly grew. As a result of the changes that he himself has observed and taken part in. Then came the most recent call from the Eyrie. Lord Hubert Royce, old and failing, still served as regent to young Lady Jane Eyre. But as his health waned, so too did the loyalty and patience of lesser houses. Meaning that a faction from the lands of the Vale rose in rebellion, distant cousins and uncles of Jane Eyre's, who claimed no girl should rule the Vale. Rhea answered to Lord Royce's dire call, with the banners of Runestone riding out at once. While the Bronze Order marched beside the Knights of the Gates loyal to Hubert, their chants echoed through the valleys of the mountainous land. The battle was fought on the slopes beneath the Eyrie, where the waterfall's water never truly falls. The rebel lords had thought to surprise them, but the Bronze moved like a single creature. Shield met shield. Steels met bronze. By the time the sun rose over the mountains, the rebellion was ended. Lord Hubert lived long enough to see victory. But not the peace that followed. On his deathbed, he called Rhea and Ronan to his side. His voice was frail, but his eyes were still sharp. Runestone stands, he said. Keep it so. Serve your liege. Honor our oath. When the bells tolled for his passing, Lady Rhea Royce was made Lady of Runestone at last. And with her banner still bloodied from battle, she strode to the halls of the Eyrie to bend the knee. Lady Jane Eyre received them in the high hall. A small girl still, only a few years older than the young lad Ronan, but also composed regal beyond her years, sitting upon her rightful heritage on the Eyrie's seat. Below her heightened throne, stood her loyalist knights and maesters, and before her knelt Rhea Royce, with her son at her side. You have done your duty more than well, Lady Rhea. Jane said, her voice soft but firm. And I owe you my safety. We owe only what was agreed upon. Rhea replied, bowing her head. The Eyres rule, and the Royces defend. And defend, you did, Jane said. So much so that the realm must be singing of it already. But my companions tell me of a boy who led men as if he were thrice his age. A boy who fights with a mind as sharp as his blade. The boy of wonders who even amused me. To which, her eyes fell upon Ronan. Step forward. So, he obeyed. Ronan Stone. She also stepped down and went closer, saying, for your valor in the mountains, the sea, and the Vale itself, I would name you Sir Ronan Stone, Knight of the Vale. Yet Ronan lowered his gaze. Lady Eyre, I am honored, but I must ask, do not knight me as Stone. You do not even need to knight me at all. Just let me bear the name of my mother, if it please you. Royce, as I have served. The court murmured, but Lady Rhea said nothing. Her eyes only glistened. Jane studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled, and relented. Then so it shall be. She shakily drew a sword, belonging to her father, the late Lord Eyre, and touched it to Ronan's shoulders. In the name of the Seven, I charge you to be brave. In the name of your ancestral Bronze Kings, I name you Royce. From henceforth, you shall be Sir Ronan Royce. With that, the hall erupted. Gerald remembered the sound, the cheer that shook the high walls, the stamping of bronze-shod boots upon marble. Ronan Stone was no more. He rose as Sir Ronan Royce, the youngest knight ever sworn in the Vale and perhaps Westeros, the boy who had reforged the bronze of Runestone and breathed new life into old honor. And Gerald, standing among the ranks at present, thought that the mountains will be sure to remember this corrected name. The infestations of the seas will too. For under this young knight and legitimized Royce heir, marched an army of knights and warriors that tore through them. And yes, before he knew it, the young squire he took in had grown, with said squire to actually be the one teaching him more than a thing or two. All in all, Gerald Royce had quite the mix of feelings when it came to that undisputable fact. Chapter 18. After the Eyre rebellion was crushed, peace did not come easily to the Vale. The fighting was over, but the tension remained. Old loyalties had been shaken, and old houses spoke in low tones about the state of things. The talk was the same across every holdfast and village: could a woman truly rule and keep the Vale together? Some said no, that men were meant to lead. Others said yes, that the Vale was better under the calm of Lady Jane Eyre than under a dozen feuding lords who had dubious intentions. Though the question reminded many of the Great Council. Some maesters asked what might have happened if the lords had chosen Princess Rhaenys instead of King Viserys. Would the realm have torn itself into conflict sooner like it is with Lady Jane's rule? Or would it have been far worse? Whatever their thoughts, the realm had no peace of mind now either. King Viserys still had only one trueborn child. Princess Rhaenyra, and his brother Daemon remained a problem no one wanted to deal with. It was a quiet unease, but a deep one, and everyone paying attention could feel it. Which was further emphasized with Lord Eobert Royce's death, and having another woman take his place, making it so that Lady Rhea Royce was now the official ruler of Runestone. To some, it seemed a fine thing, for she was capable and fierce. But others saw it as another sign that the Vale had lost its old order. The Eyrie was led by a girl, and Runestone by another. Grumblings about these issues could have risen some more in the mountains and the small folk of the lands, until those same voices fell silent after hearing of what had also happened on the battlefield of this noteworthy rebellion. The Order of the Bronze, trained and led by the young Ronan Stone, had fought like a wall of knights and warriors that seemed insurmountable. Mountain clans were crushed by them. And pirates who should have harried the coast had vanished because of them. Which were rightfully commendable in their own right. But to think that even the rebel army who tried to overthrow Jane Eyre were beaten back faster than anyone expected. And that was something else. So, people began to pay more attention to this Bronze Order, of soldiers who apparently moved as one, fought as one, and never broke ranks. But most of all, they spoke of their leader. A boy not yet grown, already commanding men twice his age. A bastard of the Lady Rhea, raised and legitimized to heirship. And now, a knight named by the Lady of the Eyrie herself. It caused an uproar in the realm and in rumors. The lords of traditions called it a scandal. A bastard made heir and a boy made knight. It was clear to them that the Vale had lost its wits. Still, some people will always see things differently. Either way, Runestone grew stronger than ever. Its trade doubled, its small ports expanding into a connected harbor, and its people walked safer roads than most of the realm could claim. Of course, as the rest of the realm clamored and murmured, the two talked about ladies of the Vale convened more often than ever. Lady Jane heard the criticisms daily. She is too young, they said. She is but a woman, even more so, a girl. They emphasized. So, she needs a husband. She needs a man to steady her rule. They demanded. To that, she answered only with what she could: steady lands, quiet borders, and a maintained Vale. However, and whenever she met with Lady Rhea Royce in the Eyrie, they often shared their sentiments over such words. Lady Jane, as grown as she might be, still needed a guide. And who better than the one who filled Lord Eobert's seat? Also, there was comfort in their partnership. Both knew the cost of holding power in a world that did not think they should have it. Letters from doubting lords went unanswered. Whispers were met with silence. And every passing day of ignoring the noise made their positions stand taller. Through certain truths that none can deny. Of course, almost always behind and between them stood Sir Ronan Royce, a young knight who had become both ally and problem. He had the respect of the East's strongest soldiers, the loyalty of the Bronze, and the ear of both women. It made some uneasy. To the lords of the mountainous kingdom, he was either a weapon or a warning. To Lady Jane, he was a rare mind, quick, strategic, and unburdened by pride. To Lady Rhea, he was blood and proof that their house would not fade quietly. The three of them, the Maiden of the Eyrie, the Lady of Runestone, and the young Bronze as they called him, were almost obviously trying to stir the future of the Vale together. And though the rest of the realm doubted women in power, or bastards raised to honor, the fact of the matter still stood, and the banners of the Falcon and the Bronze still flew. That, for now, was enough. Chapter 19. Well, this partnership with Jane is good and all, but this back and forth is way too time-consuming. Ronan complained, as he rode on horseback. Especially because he had just finished a pivotal project of his, and before he could celebrate the W, a letter just had to be downer for the excitement of it. A letter that requests for his presence, at the considerably distanced area at that. Which really wasn't anything unusual ever since Jane and his mother became besties through the trials and tribulations. What made it bad is that he became the ping-pong ball that was being pinged and ponged in between them. Of course, his mother was actually quite hands-off and was used to giving him the independence. That stuck-up and long-necked girl is getting more and more dependent to him, however. Asking him advice about how to do this and that, and offering a position like advisor or whatever. Ronan generously gave advice when he can, but always no-no'd on that open job position. The travel from Runestone to the area and vice versa would be the biggest pain to such a decision for him. Especially at times when Jane needed him for face-to-face discussion, when ravens zooming through the air is not an option. If only old Gramps Yerbert was still alive and kicking, then the girl would have someone else to bother. Then again, he kind of owed the girl a lot. Not just in terms of the knighting and debastardization and taking in all the flack from the haters, but also in terms of money. The liege lady was rich from collecting all the taxes from the houses of the Vale, Runestone included, and Ronan sort of asked quite a sum already to fund certain expensive projects of his. And he probably will be shamelessly borrowing some more in the future. So, as someone who Jane knighted herself, he had to do his duty. Duty as her debtor as well. Who knows? Maybe he'll get a discount in some of his payments, or maybe lower the interest for future Moolah transactions. Eventually, Ronan passed through all the checkpoints and counted all the freaking stairs of the Eyrie, and was then led into the Lady Erin Solar, where Lady Jane waited for him. Just before the both of them could talk business, and before he or she could speak any further, a knock came at the chamber door. Jane straightened immediately, her tone always firm, asking, "Who is it?" A voice answered from beyond the door, saying, "It's Jessamine, my lady. A raven's come from King's Landing. Enter." Jane assented. Lady Jessamine Redfort stepped inside, her expression schooled but her eyes flickering briefly toward Ronan, the boy knight standing near the lady, his custom bronze armor lettered with runes. Of course, there was no hiding the hint of wariness that crossed her face before she bowed. "My lady," Jessamine said, holding out the parchment sealed with the crown's wax. "It bears the king's hand." Jane accepted it carefully, glancing once more at Ronan as if aware of Jessamine's unspoken thoughts. "You may speak freely, Jessamine. We've no secrets here." That earned her lady-in-waiting's faint frown. "As you say, my lady. The message concerns a royal tourney to celebrate the coming birth of the king's son. His Grace calls upon you, the Warden of the East, to attend." Jane studied the seal in silence for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. "So the King Viserys holds festivities once again," she murmured. "While the realm still counts its losses, of his other babes, that is. The cousins I would have had. The tears that my aunt have shed for them." Jessamine hesitated before adding, "There is more, my lady. A second raven, addressed to make you compel Sir Ronan Royce. It seems the king truly wishes to see the Vale's youngest knight himself." Ronan looked up at that, meeting Jessamine's pointed gaze. He could almost hear the satisfaction in her tone, and see the weird jealousy in her gaze. Jane turned toward him, brows slightly raised. "You've been summoned, then?" "It would seem so," Ronan said simply, in common tongue eloquence. "Though I've heard such summons before, and I have always found ways to decline them." Jane nodded. "Indeed. Your mother and I have long agreed that the Vale's duty lies here, not in courtly spectacle." She paused, turning the parchment between her fingers. "But the king's words are firmer this time. It says here, by personal request and royal order. And aside from his kingly request, he's asking me to use my power as your liege lady as well." Jessamine's tone held an edge of finality. "Then it cannot be refused." Ronan let out a sigh at that, saying, "So it would seem." On the inside, he was complaining again. This time because of the timing of things. And also, because of all the potential Targaryen drama that he really hopes to not be thrown into. Canon is coming, after all. Chapter 20. Honestly, Ronan could not care less about the main storyline, he was more content with doing his own thing. But it would seem that his other heritage was catching up to him, specifically because he was technically part of the House of the Dragon. By virtue of his father, who is Daemon Targaryen, who is apparently astute enough in this universe to discredit his bronze bitch, annul the marriage without horse-riding accidents, and Irk said bronze bitch for a long, long time. So, well played to the rogue prince and better luck this time to his lady mother Rhea. But, at least, she wouldn't be murdered by a dude in his murder hoodie. In any case, Ronan continued to discuss what Lady Jane wanted to discuss, while treating the jealous Redfort like the air in this high-altitude palace, and then left with an excuse and a goodbye. He kind of needed to prepare for the trip, and it just so happened that the pivotal project he just wrapped up was sort of perfect for the job. The uncanny timing of things, indeed. Of course, with all that covered, he also had to prepare for whatever was going to greet them there. The king has been trying to summon him for over a year now, after all, and it is kind of easy to guess why. On paper, it was because of the accolades of his Bronze Order and being a talked-about young knight who beat bastardy. But on that paper's fine print, the dude could already be suspecting something else, and this mandatory face-to-face is meant to confirm it and all. Ronan felt like he was delaying the inevitable this whole time, and given that the king was being more forceful, it is bound to happen anyways. So, with that mindset, why not just go with the flow? And maybe see some of the scenes that he saw on the show, on a more personal perspective. Meaning that to treat it as a sightseeing vacation was the right way to go. Meanwhile, Lady Rhea Royce stood by the open window of her solar, the cold wind from the sea pushing against her dark hair. Looking by the port, something floated noticeably, themed with colors of bronze. It was Ronan's newest work, finished only days ago. And it was years in the making, a goal he had long worked towards for so long. The boy had inherited her stubbornness, no doubt, though the rest of him, the sharper edges and the boldness, those were not hers. 2 letters lay on her table, waiting to be read again. The seal it bore was the crown's, and Rhea did not doubt there were also others like them. Rhea already knew what it said. She had read one of those letters twice now. The words carried weight she had been expecting for years. The king requests his presence. The king requests the presence of her son. And this time, the monarch was not taking any rejection. Meaning that it was time. The late Lord Yorbert's words echoed in her mind again, about how time will tell of her truth. It was quite the distant memory, a young babe beside her as she reasoned and raged. Now, over 3 and 10 years had passed. She had waited long enough for that truth to be seen, for the realm to admit that she had been wronged. Many still whispered that she had driven her husband away, that she had been too proud, too sharp, too unwilling to please. Few cared to remember that Daemon Targaryen had promised her union and respect before the Septon, before many to witness. Fewer still remembered how quickly he had broken that promise, parading his insults before the court, calling her names before half the realm. The bronze bitch. Even now the title clung to her like rust. Rhea had fought to keep Runestone strong while the demon wasted his chances in King's Landing, playing knight and rogue in equal measure. He had left her shamed, mocked, and a whore in the eyes of men. They had called her disloyal, though she knew better. They had a son, in wedlock at that. Before it all went to null. Her son, the boy Daemon had never claimed, the one he had called mistake and shame, had grown into the kind of man the prince could never be. So when the maester came with the raven's missive, Rhea read it again and again. The king's words were careful, but she could sense the truth beneath them. Viserys wanted to see the boy who carried the Royce name, and perhaps to look upon Daemon's reflection, to see what his brother had truly left behind. What the rogue buried with deceit. Perhaps the king meant to absolve her. Perhaps not. Either way, it was time. So, Rhea touched the window frame, tracing the carved runes Ronan had etched there when he was much younger and testing their ancestry. He had apparently made them for protection, and she believed it to work. For his accomplishments had silenced every doubter, the Bronze Order, the rebuilding and progress of Runestone's trade, and the measured respect those achievements gave to her. That protection served far more effective than the elusive signs in this window. Unfortunately, Rhea knew she couldn't do the same to him. To protect him against his label as a stone. Which is why when the chance to legitimizing him arrived, she thought her heart would burst. Ser Ronan Royce. Her boy. The bastard undone. And became a knight so young as well. Still, the stain of being a bastard seemed to always be noted by people. Murmuring and reminding others when they can. Perhaps hoping that it will blunt the boy's ever-sharpening edge. But now, that the boy is growing and his features is molding, new whispers were starting. About how many traveled men actually saw a shadow of Daemon's face in Ronan's, and that was almost enough to stop those damaging tongues. With these new whisper mayhaps making its way to the king, and perhaps why the men had been so insistent of Ronan's presence in the capital. When the king eventually sees Daemon's supposedly obvious shadow in the boy's features, then that would be when absolution comes for her. Let King Viserys see what had become of their mistake. His, Jaehaerys, and so many others. Let them see that the child Daemon had spat upon was now the pride of hers, of Runestone, and make them regret. Of their blindness, of their foolishness, of how gullible they were. Rhea could almost imagine it now, the king's horror, the king's disbelief, and how it will all blow up in Daemon's smug face. Accordingly, let those 2 brothers choke and argue over it. She will wait for the aftermath that will only be advantageous for her, and much more so for his son. In any case, she turned from the window and summoned one of her attendants. For preparations would begin at once. Her son would ride for King's Landing soon. And she would follow. If Viserys meant to summon his son into the light, then she will see to it that he does it properly. Let the court see that Runestone stood strong, that House Royce endured dishonor, endured mockery, endured time itself, and was still unbroken. Accordingly, Rhea allowed herself a rare smile. Because her son was about to be a prince, the title that should have been promised to him. A princely title he should have had from birth. And she could only wager that this time, Northwest Targaryen or court gossip would take it from him. Chapter 21. As the mother and son from Runestone made their way to the capital, the skies above King's Landing opened with the sound of thunder that was not thunder at all. A shadow crossed the fields of cloud, vast, winged, with the golden dull of yellow. It was Syrax, young yet full of strength, her scales almost glimmering like molten gold under the sun. She cut through the air with a dancer's grace, rising and dipping, circling as if she delighted in the freedom of it. Those below, small as ants, could only look up in awe and fear, or perhaps already used to it, as the shadow of dragon wings passed over their city. Upon her back rode Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, daughter of King Viserys, first of her name, and the only child of his own blood that the realm could consider for succession. For now. Consequently, she leaned forward in her saddle, feeling the pull of the wind against her face. To fly was to live, and few things made her feel more alive than the rush of air and the strength of her dragon beneath her. The Red Keep stood ahead, red and proud upon Aegon's hill, and behind it the Dragon Pit, that great and terrible house of fire and wings. Under Rhaenyra's control. Syrax descended there, her form rippling through the air before landing in a storm of dust outside one of the enormous vault tunnels. The ground shook with the weight of her. The smell of belonging to that of a beast of fire appeared not long after as her wings were folding. From the dark mouths of the tunnels came the dragon keepers, robed in the same layered cotton they had worn since the days of old Valyria. Their faces had hints of ash and their voices rose in the language of dragons. "High Valyrian," a young dragon keeper said. "Dohiras, Syrax." "Serve, Syrax." Alas, the dragon simply twitched her long neck, huffing a cloud of smoke. She was restless, her tail swaying, claws digging at the earth. So an elder dragon keeper took over to say, "Lakiri. Lakiri. Calm, calm, asterisk." Slowly, Syrax quieted, though her eyes stayed sharp and wild. Taking that as signal, Rhaenyra began her descent by unfastening her saddle straps and climbed down with practiced ease. With a leap to the ground, the dust curling around her boots. She was but a girl that just passed 14, her hair pale as beaten silver and her expression calm, surveying and noting of the entourage that awaited. For a short distance away waited Ser Harold Westerling, white cloak draped over his shoulders, his armor gleaming in the sun. The commander of the King's Guard sat his horse, ever patient but always wary. Around him stood a squire, 2 pages, and a wheelhouse bearing the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Her ride. Rhaenyra noted how Ser Harold shifted in his saddle as the keepers worked. Though it was clear that man had seen dragons most of his life, the princess knew that he never could watch one without his hand straying to the pommel of his sword. Rhaenyra also saw her friend by the doorway of the wheelhouse, the Lady Alicent Hightower, no older than herself, though different in every other way. She was softer, quieter, and with her watching eyes that the princess was all too familiar with. And as she trusted the keepers to lead her dragon back into the pit, Rhaenyra wiped a strand of loosened hair from her face and then walked toward Ser Harold and Alicent. Accordingly, the knight inclined his head as she neared, greeting with a "Welcome back, princess. I trust your ride was pleasant. Try not to look too relieved, Ser." Rhaenyra said back in amusement as she saw the man's eased smile. While the King's Guard just reasoned that. "I am relieved, princess. Every time that golden beast returns you unspoiled, it saves my head from a spike." That made Rhaenyra chuckle a bit, but then she turned toward Alicent, who was now stepping out of the wheelhouse. Probably to greet her. "Syrax is growing quickly," Alicent commented, adding that she'll soon be as large as Carax's. To which, Rhaenyra teased her. "That's large enough to saddle too, so you can fly with me." But her Alicent was not amused as always, reassuring that "I believe I am quite content as a spectator or just flying the kites, thank you." Rhaenyra could only smile. Content and happy with the usual interactions like these. Then she climbed into the wheelhouse, following Alicent who went in ahead of her. And inside, the two girls continued to no doubt converse and giggle like usual, like the friends they are. With gossip about the ladies and the possibility that the young bronze is to arrive in King's Landing. They do so almost without worry or care for everything else around them. Even when a certain someone was expecting one of them to not be late in filling the cups of an already nearing council meeting. Chapter 22. The carriage of a wheelhouse creaked as it rolled down the cobbled streets of King's Landing, the clatter of hooves and turning axles muffled behind thick velvet curtains. Rhaenyra sat opposite the Lady Alicent with them conversing as they usually did. While they did so, the air outside the carriage was alive with shouts and smells, maybe fish from the docks, bread from the bakers, and the ever-present stink of the city that no sea breeze could wash away. She assumed them to probably be so. For the design of the window was a bit too guarded and the curtains were drawn, its small slits giving only fleeting glimpses of the city beyond. Sometimes she caught sight of the rooftops, sometimes of children running barefoot, or the blur of banners fluttering from merchant stalls. But most of it was noise and shadow. She had always found it strange that, though she was the realm's delight, she saw little of the realm itself. The wheelhouse and its closed design made sure of that. Which is why she loved riding Syrax, it gave her a glimpse of so much more. Accordingly, by the time their entourage reached the Red Keep, the air had changed, the noise of the city dimmed, replaced by the echo of boots, the bark of orders, and the heavy sound of gates being drawn open. When they stopped, Alicent was the first to rise. The door opened, and sunlight poured in. Together, the two of them stepped out onto the courtyard. Guards and servants bowed as they passed. Rhaenyra adjusted her cloak and kept her head high, feeling the weight of eyes on her as they crossed the keep's stone path and passed through its archways. Deeper inside the keep was quieter. Familiar. Its echoing halls swallowed their footsteps as they passed red banners, old portraits, carved columns, testaments to the past. Rhaenyra moved faster now, her heart quickening as they neared her mother's solar. When they entered, her mother Emma was reclined on a cushioned couch, heavy with child, worry beating her brow, yet it eased at the sight of her. Attendants flitted like moths around her, adjusting pillows, pressing cool cloths to her skin, offering drinks she refused with the turn of a wrist. Ah. Rhaenyra. The queen's voice was breathy but clear. Her eyes fluttered while she said, "You know I don't like you to go flying while I'm in this condition." "You don't like me to go flying while you're in any condition," Rhaenyra said, removing her gloves. "Your Grace." Alicent, who stood behind, offered with a practiced curtsy. "Good morrow, Alicent," Emma said kindly, before turning back to her daughter. Which is when Rhaenyra asked, "Did you sleep?" "I slept." "How long?" Rhaenyra sat by her mother's feet. The queen looked down at her, softening just slightly to say, "I don't need mothering, Rhaenyra." "Well, here you are, surrounded by attendants, all focused on the babe. Someone has to attend to you." An empathetic sentiment that made Emma want to remind her that. "You will lie in this bed soon enough, Rhaenyra. This discomfort is how we serve the realm. I'd rather serve as a knight and ride to battle and glory like the famous Sir Royce." She rebutted, but the queen was just amused, with her own experience that carried the weight of years. "We have royal wombs, you and I. The childbed is our battlefield. We must learn to face it with a stiff lip." The queen gave that lesson and then she commanded, "Now take a bath. You stink of dragon." Rhaenyra reacted as she did, but her mother's words stayed with her. Of course, that thought was paused as she remembered that she still had cupbearing to do, a fact that was actually brought up by Ser Harold, who then saw to accompanying her in the upcoming flurry. Before long, they arrive at the small council chamber. But by the time Rhaenyra entered, the masters of the small council were already in mid-discussion. With her father, the king, saying this. "And are we meant to weep for dead pirates?" "No, your grace." Which was the Lord Corlys of Driftmark and master of ships assenting. Consequently, her father came to notice her, who then said, "You're late, Rhaenyra. The king's cupbearer must not be late. Leaves people wanting for cups." "I was visiting mother," she reasoned. "On Dragonback." He wondered after sniffing the scent she has yet to wash off. Meanwhile, Corlys Valyrian sat down heavily, his face dark with frustration. Her interruption must have been the reason, and Rhaenyra could only attend to her duty more seriously, reaching for the flagon and moving around the table to fill their drained drinks. As it so happens, Lord Lyman Beesbury, the master of coin, brought up something about her own uncle. Your Grace, at Prince Daemon's urging, the Crown has invested significant capital in the retraining and re-equipping of his city watch. I thought you might urge your brother to fill his seat on the council and provide an assessment of his progress as commander of the watch. Do you think Daemon is distracted by his present tasks? Her father questioned. And that his thoughts and energies are occupied? Well, one would hope so. Lord Lyman wearily answered. Considering the associated costs. Perhaps to put a stopper to that, her father declared. Then let us all consider your gold well invested, Lord Beesbury. Rhaenyra resisted the urge to smirk. Beesbury could always be counted on to count coins and fumble words. She liked her Uncle Daemon well enough, and she trusted his instincts more than these old men did. But still, Daemon played games with everyone, including her. Lord Corlys then spoke up. I would urge that you not allow this triarchy much latitude in the stepstones, Your Grace. If those shipping lanes should fall, it will beggar our ports. And the quite hand in Lord Otto interjected. The Crown has heard your report, Lord Corlys, and takes it under advisement. While the Lord of the Tide's jaw tightened and as her father also kept quiet. Rhaenyra noticed how Lord Otto actually spoke firm and condescending, but still with that cool Hightower calm. The Lord Hand clearly had a different way to stop an issue compared to the king. He also had his own way of shifting the topic, by saying, Shall we discuss the heirs tournament, Your Grace? I would be delighted. Her father was enthused as he then turned to the more older men in the table, asking, Will the Maester's name day prediction hold, Melas? Melas, the old Grandmaster, cautioningly said. You must understand that these things are mere estimations, my king, but we have all been poring over the moon charts, and we feel that our forecast is as accurate as it can be. As that went on, Rhaenyra eventually reached Lord Corlys and tilted the flagon, but he raised his hand to stop her. A quiet rejection. Still, the talks continued. The cost of the tournament is not negligible. Perhaps we might delay until the child is in hand. Lord Lyman expressed his concern. While Lord Lionel of Laws countered. Most of the lords and knights are certainly on their way to King's Landing already. To turn them back now. The tourney will take the better part of a week. Her father interrupted. Before the games are over, my son will be born, and the whole realm will celebrate. We have no way of predicting the sex of the child. The Grandmaster said in contrast to the king's assuredness. But her father remained stubborn. Of course, no maesters capable of rendering an opinion free of conditions, are they now? Adding that. There's a boy in the queen's belly. I know it. And my heir will soon put all of this damnable hand-wringing to rest himself. Rhaenyra could only listen quietly to that fervent belief. Her smile didn't falter, but it thinned. The prospect of having a brother was fine to her, but she didn't like how it consumed her father. Still, she already steeled herself. With him having his heir, she will eventuality be set aside, and as a princess, Rhaenyra could only accept. Chapter 23. The council chamber had long emptied, but the echo of words, those damned, dismissive words, still rang in Lord Corlys Valerion's ears. He strode down the steps and out of the red keep with a face carved from storm clouds, his cloak of sea blue silk snapping behind him. Every servant that crossed his path quickly turned aside. They could feel it, the kind of fury that boiled low and steady, the kind that drowned ships and split hulls. The meeting had been a farce. A mockery of sense and reason. He, Corlys Valerion, Lord of the Tides, Master of Ships, who had sailed bolder than any man currently alive, had brought his warnings before the Crown, and been silenced like a petty clerk. The Crown has heard your report, Lord Corlys, and takes it under advisement. Otto Hightower's smug, measured tone still scraped against his skull like barnacles on a keel. The men didn't even look at him kindly as he said it, as though speaking to someone lesser. Corlys clenched his jaw. At the thought of the hand of the king. What an ill-fitted title for a man whose hands has probably never known labor nor blood, whose only craft was whispering in the king's ear and pretending it was wisdom. He knew the truth well enough. Otto was jealous, of his house, of his blood, of the Valerian growing further and greater than his own. Especially when those at Old Town was stagnant, so the second son of the Hightowers wanted to put him down in some way. That scheming man's fortune had been his tongue, not his merit. And that same tongue was what now held sway over that weak and pliant King Viserys. A pest. That was what the man was. A gilded pest, high on favor and self-importance. That Prince Daemon had called him worse, and Corlys had brushed it off whenever he heard it. But now, he almost agreed. Or just agreed entirely. In any case, Corlys left the keep without another word, his thoughts black as the depths of the sea. If only things had gone differently all those years ago. If only the Great Council had not robbed his wife of her birthright. If the lords of Westeros had not been so afraid of crowning a woman, Rhaenys would have been queen. And he, Corlys Velaryon, would have stood beside her as king consort. And maybe even serve as her hand. Inadvertently, he remembered the crowd that day at Harrenhal. How afterwards they had whispered about the queen that never was. It had broken something in Rhaenys, though she never said it aloud. She had smiled, bowed, and accepted the decision. But Corlys had seen the hurt beneath her calm, the quiet pain of being told that blood and merit meant nothing beside a man's pride. And he had done everything, but it was akin to nothing. He could have spoken out more. He could have shed the blood of others for her claim. It was so close, yet also far away. And now, it was that Viserys sat the Iron Throne, with his soft hands clutching at dreams of sons and heirs while the realm's trade rotted beneath him. The Triarchy was choking the stepstones, seizing ships, enslaving sailors as crab feed, and strangling the lanes that fed the ports of Driftmark. Yet the king sat smiling, talking of tournaments and name days, his head filled with clouds and unborn babes. Corlys felt the rage rise again. He could almost see Otto's smug smirk and could almost hear Viserys' soft aspirations as if none of it mattered. The sea snake knew better. The sea did not forgive neglect. It took what was left unguarded. By the time he reached the docks, the wind had picked up, snapping the Velaryon banners along the pier. His fleet bobbed on the waves beyond, sleek, proud ships of pale wood and silver sails. The sight steadied him somewhat. The sea was his. The ships were his. His power remained, even if the court refused to see it. And as he confided to his awaiting brother in what had happened, Daemon just raged. Brother. His younger brother fumed as they stood waiting at the dock's edge. With arms crossed and that familiar impatience plain on his face. I half expected you to throw Otto Hightower into the harbor. Daemon said, and Corlys just grunted. The thought crossed my mind. Daemon snorted, stepping closer. You should have pressed harder about the Triarchy. Gods, Corlys, those men makes fools of us all. The crab-feeders' men have already seized another of our merchant cogs. They're nailing captains to their own masts. I know. Corlys said darkly. But our king does not care. His mind is on an unborn son, not sailors. Our ships are being burned, and his mind is still on this upcoming tourney. Daemon snapped, pacing. Does he not see what's coming? If those bastards keep the stepstones, we lose half our trade. Driftmark bleeds. The realm bleeds. Not all the realm. Corlys muttered. Only those like us who work the waters. Daemon turned sharply. And you just let them dismiss you? Corlys' eyes narrowed. I let them reveal themselves. The crown does not heed warnings until the fire reaches its doorstep. But it will. And when it does, they'll remember that it was I who cautioned them. Daemon opened his mouth to retort, but then both men paused. For out at sea, a great shadow loomed. At first it was a smudge on the horizon, a strange bulge rising from the glimmering line of the water. Then it grew larger, too large. What in the seven hells? Daemon whispered. Corlys stepped forward, squinting against the glare. The vessel was massive, twice the size of his flagship. Its body gleamed with traces of bronze that caught the sun like fire. Its sails billowed with the wind, but in spite of the low breeze, its huge body was still cutting through the waves with uncanny grace. It glided over the water as though the sea itself bent to let it pass. At a speed that alarmed him. That ship. Corlys said under his breath. That's no galley. No mere merchant carrack. As it neared, the details became clear. And it was so much more than its already unique figurehead, a warrior woman in bronze armor. As the ship's sides were engraved with fine runes. Its sails bore a bronze shield traced with black iron studs and old writings, the sigil of House Royce. Daemon followed his gaze. From the veil. Corlys nodded slowly. Runestone. At that, he felt his pulse quicken. So it would seem that the rumors were true. Rhea Royce and her boy had done more than just build, they had created something massive. A ship like that, it could cross seas no man dared. And the name that now circled the docks and taverns alike came to him. Ronan Royce, the young bronze, knight and tinkerer both. Corlys had heard the stories from his own men that dock at runestone ports, about how the boy had spent his youth making toy ships that actually floated, each one larger and faster than the last. With the boy's seaworthy design being called the bronze cogs. Like the single-sailed cog ships anywhere else, but noticeably better as they claimed. Then it was the bronze junks, with their uniquely battened sails. Reminiscent of the Yiddish junks, but apparently more put together. Slowly but surely, the Royce's ever-connecting ports were now docked with those ships, but to think they had this. For it was said that the little toymaker was building something greater, a vessel that could outmatch even Valyrian design. Corlys had laughed when he first heard it. But he wasn't laughing now. That is no fisher's or sailor's dream. Vaemond muttered, awe creeping into his voice. That's a floating fortress. Corlys said nothing for a long moment, eyes never leaving the bronze giant as it slid closer to port. The banner of runestone flapped proudly atop its mast. This changes things, he said at last. What do you mean? Vaemond asked. I mean, Corlys muttered. That if the bronze boy can build one ship like that, he can build more. And if he does, the sea may soon have a new master. Then they watched as the bronze-themed vessel cut through the waters with perfect precision, its shadow falling across his fleet like a prophecy. The sea is ours. Corlys whispered to himself. It will always be ours. And as he said it, his thoughts ran and his mind churned, about how to deal with this unexpected threat, or how to make a deal with someone who might be his most unlikely ally of the future. Chapter 24. For a maiden voyage, this chunky gal has done quite all right. Ronan commented while on the raised quarterdeck of this very big ship. Which is the very project he had just finished, and he just had to be bold with some safety tests and whatnot by going all the way. From Runestone's ports to King's Landing. Fortunately, it did just fine and fit the parameters that he designed it to be. As a self-proclaimed Grandmaster shipwright, he expected nothing less. It was perfect, just like he drew it, Craig of the Creek style but more grown up with brown prints and all, cause blue paper is not yet accessible. The only other issue was that his Knights of the Bronze Order were not yet up to par with any motley sailing crew, as they were still not really used to handling this whole thing. Both long-distance seafaring and such a huge semi-complex vessel like this. But that will come in time, for now, he just said that. It is still passable at the very least. Only passable. Mother Rhea, who overheard, couldn't help but chime in. Just what counts as an excellent beast of a sea vessel for you, Ronan? And don't tell me you're going to lend this out to others again. She worried. Like all the prior iterations you have made and were not satiated with. The ones that the fishermen and hardy sailors more than praised already. They're only saying that because I was being generous enough to almost give it to them. Ronan downplayed and then said. But yeah. I'm going to keep this one, and even make more of it. More of these big chunky gals for the guys to get used to. And Rhea had not much to say after that. Her son knew more than her and had a better grasp of whatever he's envisioning. She could only hope that such a wonderful ship not be left with the name of Chunky Gal. For it felt odd, just as how this son of hers oftentimes calls his men as guys, and dudes and bros among other things. But given that this was the boy that made boomerangs and jengas and dreidels and takras and hula hoops, chunky gals and guys and his seldom deviative way of talking should not come as a surprise. On the other, Ronan already locked in on a name other than Chunky Gal and Bronze Chunky Gal. As he wanted to honor the Yanta Maria that inspired the design. Though it's not really the same ship that can dwarf a giant like Hadrudden, so it is what it is. Perhaps closer to the Santa Maria that the Yanta Maria is alluding to, and with the helm being reminiscent of his mother. Saint Rhea is what this great ship's name will be. A multi-masted Carrack-esque butte. Or maybe Santa Maria, cause that seemed fun. Then again, regardless of what it would be known as, the capabilities of this chunky gal was no joke. Ronan could even argue that it's the best seacraft of this world, that he knew of. For all its worth in Jane's gold that he borrowed, he tried to chuck it in with the best that he can. Steel plating some of it, so it is kind of like the metal floaters of his old world, albeit very bronze in some of the plating, cause of the pride of the house and whatnot. But more copper-heavy alloy on the underbelly because of its tested reliability, against the marine life and very watery elements. He also scorpioned it all over with scorpions that can double as harpoons, cause why not? No cannons just yet, but there's quite a few more to be said about the inside and interiors. As he really used and maximized the knowledge he accrued over the years, plus the bonuses that came from the page in his head. Rune tech included. Of course, to top all of those off. Ronan could say that this creation is currently the biggest there is. At least he thinks so. With 4 stories below deck, enough to house a very, very sizable crew, and maybe double that when they cramp up in the reasonably sized compartments. And a whole lot of space for storage and the merchanting that Ronan plans to do. With its superior size further evidenced by how every other ship in these Crownland waters was looking very mid in comparison. So, big and huge, this ship is. And, it had to be noted, that he's actually not overcompensating for something. Totally not at all. Especially cause he was literally just a 13-year-old now, and his relatively teeny-weeny should still grow, hopefully. Then again, as he was jokingly thinking about that issue, he actually saw 2 black dudes looking straight back at him from the nearing ports. Looking as if they had some kind of beef or a deal that they want to make. Which, in his opinion, is just a whole lot of weird. Or maybe just uncanny. Especially when their dreadlocks were looking quite silvery. Chapter 25. In the Queen's chamber, the night air hung thick with the scent of burning candles and steaming water. Queen Emma herself sat half submerged in her bath, her skin faintly flushed from the heat that the maesters insisted must not go higher. The chamber was quiet but for the crackling of the flames against wax, and the faint rippling of water when she shifted. Then King Viserys entered, looking worn but still hearty, even when his back is heavy from a day's worth of counsel and diagnosis. And the maesters had prodded at his wound again and again, whispering of rot that refused to heal. Nevertheless, he eased himself beside the bath, gazing at her with a tired sort of fondness. "You spend more time in that bath than I do on the throne," he said, his tone light and jovial. Emma barely glanced at him. "This is the only place I can find comfort these days." He dipped his hand into the water and frowned. "It's tepid. It's as warm as the maesters will allow," she replied. "Don't they know dragons prefer heat?" Emma gave a soft laugh, though her eyes looked distant. "After this miserable pregnancy, I wouldn't be surprised if I hatched an actual dragon. Then he will be loved and cherished," Viserys said, lifting her hand and kissing it gently. "Rhaenyra has already declared she is to have a sister," Emma said. "Really? She even named her. Dare I ask?" "Visenya," Emma replied, amused and weary. "She chose a dragon's egg for the cradle that she said reminded her of Vhagar." Viserys sighed. "Gods be good. This family already has its Visenya." There was a quiet moment before Emma asked, "Has there been any word from your dear brother?" "Not since I named him commander of the city watch," Viserys said. "I'm sure he'll re-emerge for the tourney. He could never stay away from the lists." Emma gave him a look, her fingers tracing the rim of the bath. "I read words from my niece Jane. She said that the young Bronze, the child we think to be Daemon's boy, has officially sailed for King's Landing. So it is best you be ready." Viserys drew a long breath. "Aye. Words reached me as well. About how the Royce party arrived at the docks not long past. The harbor was nearly blocked by their ship, so large it struggled to fit in the berth. The folk of the city have been gathering to stare at it. A bronze monster, they say. The largest thing to ever sail into Blackwater Bay." Emma looked troubled. "So, the boy is already here?" He nodded. "So it seems. Do you think he knows?" she asked quietly. "Of his true father?" Viserys hesitated, then shook his head. "Rhea has likely not kept the truth buried from him. Still, it is a cruel thing, the way Daemon wronged her, and the boy, if he is what I think he is. So, if there is a way to mend what my grandsire and brother broke, I will find it." Emma turned her eyes toward him, though worry shadowed her face. "And if the boy strengthens Daemon's claim? For Ronan Royce is already renowned in the Vale and the rest of the realm, and if the rumors of his charm and talent are true, then with both father and son commanding such attentions, it will make our own line look fragile." Viserys waved it off, almost impatiently. "We are organizing a tourney for our firstborn son, are we not? Let the people see the strength of ours." Emma let out a tired sigh, leaning her head back against the bath's edge. "The tourney to celebrate the firstborn son that we presently do not have. You do understand nothing will cause the babe to grow a cock if it does not already possess one." "This child is a boy, Emma," Viserys said firmly. While she scoffed softly. "I'm certain of it." Her husband insisted. "I've never been more certain of anything." The dream, it was clearer than a memory. He said. "Our son was born wearing Aegon's iron crown. When I heard the sound of thundering hooves, of shields shattering and swords clashing, I placed our son upon the Iron Throne as the bells of the Grand September tolled and all the dragons roared as one." Emma turned her head. Born wearing a crown. God spare me, birth is unpleasant enough as it is. Viserys smiled faintly and kissed her hand again. This is the last time, Viserys, she said wearily. I've lost one babe in the cradle, had 2 stillbirths, and 2 pregnancies ended well before their term. That's 5 in twice as many years. I know it is my duty to provide you an heir, and I'm sorry if I have failed you in that. I am. But I've mourned all the dead children I can. She added with sadness. To which, the king could only keep quiet. For he has mourned as much as she has as well. But duty calls to him. As the king, he must have an heir. A male heir. Chapter 26. While the king and queen shared private words within the Red Keep, the city beyond its walls stirred with another kind of interaction. The streets of King's Landing, dim and restless beneath the flickering torchlight, pulsed with chaos. Men and women scurried through alleys and open squares, unaware that tonight, their city's nightly unusuality was about to break even further. For in a certain place, members of the city watch, all clad in gleaming gold cloaks, banged on their armored chests with fervor and excitement. Daemon Targaryen then strode through the ranks, his expression unreadable, eyes sharp, while a dragon helm was tucked under his arm. As he moved, the watchmen banged their fists against their chests in acknowledgement, their gold cloaks shimmering in the flickering torchlight. Commander on the floor. A fervent Daemon loyalist named Randall Barrett barked, his voice rough and commanding. Making the banging cease instantly. Daemon's gaze swept the gathered men, his presence like a storm. When I took command of the watch, he began, voice steady and cold. You were stray mongrels, starving and undisciplined. Now you're a pack of hounds. Sated, and honed for the hunt. The watchmen howled, their voices rising in savage agreement as they banged their weapons against shields. Daemon's lips twitched into a faint smile, a man satisfied with the power he commanded. His eyes turned to his crowd of loyal men and said, My brother's city has fallen into squalor. Crime of every breed has been allowed to thrive. No longer. He shouted and added. Beginning tonight, King's Landing will learn to fear the color gold. For the city's squalor had festered for too long, and now Daemon intended to remind everyone who ruled these streets. And under his gaze, the watch surged forward, spilling into the darkened city. Soon, the streets were filled with the sounds of pursuit, shouts, the clang of steel, and the desperate cries of the hunted. A group of 2 peasants, clutching their belongings, tried to outrun a squad of watchmen. One was tackled to the ground, his face twisted in terror. The other was cornered against a wall, fists raised in futile resistance. Outnumbered, they stood little chance. The watchmen's boots echoed loudly against cobblestones as they chased down the desperate and whomever they considered guilty. Groups of peasants, merchants, and common folk, many outnumbered, ran in every direction, their faces twisted with fear. Some were tackled to the ground, their limbs pinned beneath heavy-booted feet, others were cornered against walls, glaring with defiance or begging for mercy. The gold-cloaked men herded these prisoners into a central square, a muddy, battered open space illuminated by flickering torches. Here, Daemon stood overseeing the brutal spectacle, his arms crossed, watching with cold detachment. A man was held tight by 2 guards, trembling as a third approached wielding a wicked blade. Randall Barrett stepped forward, a cruel glint in his eyes. Raper. He barked, pointing at a gauntman who was pushed into a clearing. The crowd parted to make space. Another watchman unsheathed his sword, its steel gleaming with lethal intent. The accused screamed as the said watchman swiped the blade, its sharp edge biting into flesh and bone with brutal efficiency. The accused man's screams were heard, which then eventually faded from losing consciousness as these grim and unflinching men of the watch had already castrated him, tossing the severed balls onto a nearby stump. The crowd winced but dared not speak. Thief! Randall then shouted, approaching another man whose hand had been held out as a sign of forced surrender. With a cold swipe, the hand was cut off at the wrist. Blood sprayed onto the cobblestones. Daemon's eyes flicked to the next condemned, this one a man accused of murder. Randall motioned him forward. Murderer. Randall intoned, voice thick with menace. Daemon then stepped closer, unsheathing his sword. The storied Dark Sister. The accused murderer flailed and screamed as Daemon raised the Valyrian blade, but it still sliced through flesh with deliberate precision. That man's head was soon placed on a cart filled with other dismembered parts, a stark display of Daemon's brand of justice. The crowd watched in equal parts of stunned silence and noises of terror, the brutal display a reminder of what Daemon was capable of. He believed this punishment would echo through the city, fear and respect forged in blood. Then and there, the prince thought of his brother's court, of the loathsome Otto Hightower, of the nobleman's whispers. They would all hear of tonight. And that should include the recently arrived young bronze, who had grown quite fine and worthy. His son, indeed. Such a shame that his own bloodline was tainted by that bronze bitch, making the boy's hair black and eyes dominantly gray. Such flaws that Daemon refused to forget. For it was a dilution of old Valyria's distinct trait and an impurity mixed in the fire and blood of Targaryen greats. But still, that Ronan is his son, only that he will not claim the boy and continue to disown him. After all that fuss he made to eventually end that farce of a marriage. Daemon just didn't want to waste it. Nevertheless, with his city watch doing all of this, the boy should soon hear of his father's greatness. Of how Daemon Targaryen commands an army of 2,000 gold cloaks, which are most definitely better than that bronze order of only over 1,000. Most definitely, his army was better. 4 gold tops bronze. And, of course, he was not overcompensating for anything. Not. Chapter 27. By morning, the sun barely touched the towers of the Red Keep when King Viserys and his hand, Otto Hightower, made their way toward the small council chamber. The echo of their boots carried through the corridors, accompanied by Otto's measured words. It was an unprecedented roundup of criminals of every ilk. Otto said, his tone edged with disapproval. Your brother made a public show of it, meting out the summary judgments himself. Viserys sighed. Gods be good. I'm told they needed a 2-horse cart to haul away the resulting dismemberments when it was done. Otto added as they reached the chamber doors. The prince cannot be allowed to act with this kind of unchecked impunity. The guards already had the doors open, and the smell of parchment, candle wax, and lingering smoke filled the air. Inside, the awaiting counselors rose from their seats as the king entered. Unexpectedly, the talked-about Daemon Targaryen was already there, seated with ease and his expression calm, as if the blood and screams from the night before had never happened. Brother. Daemon greeted. Daemon. Said Viserys. Daemon them gave a faint smile to the hand and urged. Carry on. You were saying something about my impunity. Otto's mouth tightened. You are to explain your doings with the city watch. Consequently, the king and the hand set their small marble stones into the plates before them, marking their attendance. Your new gold cloaks made quite the impression last night, didn't they? Viserys asked. Did they? Daemon easily questioned back. Everyone else took their seats. The city watch is not a sword to be wielded at your whim. Otto said with reprimand. They're an extension of the crown. The watch was enforcing the crown's laws. Daemon replied. Wouldn't you agree, Lord Strong? Lord Lionel the Master of Laws tried to answer, but Otto cut him off. Making a spectacle of wanton brutality is hardly in line with those laws. Nobles from every corner of the realm are descending on King's Landing for the tourney. Daemon said. Do you want them mugged, raped, murdered? You might not know this, living in the Red Keep, but much of the city is seen as lawless and frightening. Our people should feel safe. Viserys sighed. I agree. I only hope you don't have to maim half the city to achieve it. Time will tell. Daemon confidently said. Lord Corley spoke then. We installed Prince Daemon as commander to bring law and order. The criminal element should fear the city watch. Making Daemon nod with a grin. I thank you for your support, Lord Corlys. Viserys suddenly interjected. If only you showed the same devotion to your former wife as you have to this work. The Vale and Runestone could have used such enthusiasm. Daemon's eyes narrowed. I think that bronze bitch is happier for my absence, brother. And need I remind you that that ship had long sailed, with me being a very desirable bachelor for any other lady out there. Viserys interjected. Lady Rhea was your wife, a good and honorable lady of the Vale. Otto pressed. As his grace said, Prince Daemon. Daemon's tone turned cruel at the Hightower's parroting. In the Vale, men are said to bed sheep instead of women. I can assure you, the sheep are prettier. Dear me. Blurted the Lord Lyman. You made a vow before the 7 to honor your wife. Otto reminded him. I'd gladly introduce the unfaithful Lady Rhea to you, Lord Hightower. Daemon snapped back. If you're in need of a woman to warm your bed. Your own lady wife passed recently. Otto stood sharply to interrupt, face red. Did she not? Daemon continued to ask, feigning innocence. Otto. Viserys warned. While Daemon just smirked. Perhaps you aren't ready to move on just yet. Viserys rubbed his temples. You know how my brother makes sport of provoking you. Must you indulge him? Otto sat down stiffly. My apologies, Your Grace. Viserys then turned to his brother. This council has, at great expense, bettered the city watch to your standards. Enforce my laws, but any more performances like last night's will be answered. Understood, Your Grace. Daemon said, then just rose to leave. But before he could reach the door, Viserys spoke again. And Daemon, restrain yourself from speaking ill of Lady Rhea. I will not hear more slander of her, especially since she's here in the capital for the tourney, under my own invitation. A rather special one at that. That stopped Daemon cold. His non-existent brows furrowed as he turned slightly, uncertain if he'd heard right. Viserys only continued. Just consider me a fool for now, brother, but not a blind one. The young bronze will have an audience with me soon enough, and depending on what I see, we'll have a serious talk, you and I. Daemon's face betrayed nothing. Whatever you say, brother. He left then, saying nothing more. Yet as he walked away, he faintly heard Viserys talk on. King's Landing has been in decline since my grandmother passed. In the end, this new city watch might be a good thing. The rest of the council sat in silence, unsure what had just transpired. Though their sharp minds churned. On the other hand, Otto and Corlys had quick glint in their eyes, each grasping something and drawing their own conclusions. Regardless, Viserys as the king didn't offer them answers and simply changed the subject, for they were convened already, so the business of the realm went on as usual. Chapter 28. The talks went on as they did. And even the cup-bearing princess arrived fashionably late like last time. Regardless, it went on. With the Master of Ships expressing his concerns for the Triarchy once again. The Master of Coin gave accounts on all expenditure that is to be made in the next couple of weeks. And the gold that would be lost when the Master of Ships had his way. Accordingly, the Master of Laws was all about the reasonable enforcement of the law, and the regulation of the fervent city watch who enforces it. While the Grand Maester simply gave notices on the Queen's condition and scholarly insights when his opinion was needed. While the Hand handled all that they brought up and proposed in accordance to what he saw fit. Only with the King's approval, of course. A dynamic that was only a bit different from meetings past, yet still nothing out of the usual for the lot of them. However, quite unexpectedly, the audience with the young bronze that the king had mentioned was happening sooner than expected. As a matter of fact, just after the small council was wrapped up and the members were taking off their marbles to symbolize their exit, a king's guard opened the door to announce. The Lady Rhea Royce of Runestone and Sir Ronan Royce are here, Your Grace. Ah, yes, the king noted, a faint note of apprehension in his expression, though he still added. It is about that time, I see. And it would also seem that this discussion of ours ran long. Meaning that one meeting's end bled into another's start, and Viserys could only begrudge himself for not managing time any better. Consequently, instead of the council members making their way out to other responsibilities and duties, all of them stayed rooted where they were, quite curious of what this was about. Viserys, who wanted to urge them away, stopped his tongue. He had wanted this to be a private discussion with the Royces, but perhaps the presence of his council could be in his favor. After all, this special audience was without precedent, and he was quite out of his depth. Accordingly, as he was thinking so, a bronze-attired lady and her bronze-armored son walked in. And one simple look at the boy made Viserys sigh quite heavily. For his and his queen's worries rang true. In a different way. As the boy, no, the young man, stood proud beside his mother, tall and broad of shoulder, his bearing noble, his manner calm. And yet, for all the whispers that spoke of him as Daemon's image reborn, Viserys found himself struggling to see it. They said he was the spitting likeness of his little brother in youth. But Viserys had seen Daemon as a boy, wild, sharp-featured, all Valyrian fire and arrogance even before the dragons took to him. And this lad? Well, this lad had none of that at all. He might even be something else entirely. Maybe someone else's son as Daemon claimed him to be. Dark-haired, gray-eyed, and mayhaps just bronze features of runestone written upon his face. There were traces of Targaryen sharpness, yes, a tilt of the chin, perhaps, the faintest flicker of purple in his gaze, but nothing more. Nothing conclusive at all. While the rest was most likely Royce, solid, earthbound, steady, far too tempered to ever be Daemon's reflection. The gods could play cruel jests, Viserys mused privately in his head. For he was no witch who could read blood and lineage by just looking at a face. So, quite frankly, he was stumped at what to react and how to proceed. And so he stalled. He stalled long enough that the council exchanged glances. Otto stood straight in quiet expectation, Corlys raising a brow, while the rest studied the boy with intrigue. He stalled so long that even the clueless Rhaenyra, who had been shocked at the young famous knight's presence, went close to ask softly, "Father." Her tone was a child's confusion and a daughter's worry all at once. Viserys blinked, as if waking from a long thought. "Ah, yes. Forgive me." He apologized then, forcing a smile. "Lady Rhea of Runestone, welcome to the Red Keep, and to the small council, though I must apologize for the circumstances. Also I must apologize belatedly, for it was never my wish for the matter between my brother and yourself to have ended as it did." He gestured toward a seat, but alas, she did not take it. "You are an honored guest, my lady. I am most pleased that you have come." Making Lady Rhea incline her head slightly, her face unreadable of how she truly felt about the pretenses. For this was different to how she expected it to go. Accordingly, Viserys turned to the young man standing beside her. "And Ser Ronan, your name has traveled far across the realm, even as far as my own hall. A boy once called Stone, now the young Bronze, your toys, crafts, and inventions have given amusement to the court, the nobles and the small folk alike. I dare say your fame has, at times, rivaled even mine." A few listeners reacted faintly at that, though the king's tone remained warm. "It gladdens me to see such talent in one so young. Runestone must be proud indeed." And the bronze youth just gave a simple nod. While the king meant the words as a gracious welcome, but in truth, his heart was still weighing the quiet uncertainty that he dared not voice. This meeting was not the reveal of blood or lineage that he and the queen might have expected, it was something unexpected. Something stranger. Something odd and inexplicable. Something that made him all the more doubt. And not at all the absolution and the unveiling of the truth that it should have been. Chapter 29. The news spread eventually, from whispers, to murmurs, to gossip, that the Lady of Runestone and her bronze-clad son were granted a private audience with the king. Or so it was meant to be, only for the entire small council to remain present. A curiosity that set half the court aflame. Why were the Royces called specifically? What business could the king possibly have with that rugged Vale lady and her bastard son? The more the lords and ladies questioned, the grander their imaginations became. Some said the king wished to make amends for the wrongs done to House Royce. Others whispered that he might have meant to name the bastard his brother's trueborn heir, a scandal of royal proportion. Though, that was most unlikely, as Prince Daemon said so, that the bronze bitch was a bitch that was in heat with somebody else. The late King Jaehaerys backed those claims and the new King Viserys himself had the marriage annulled. Most likely to be truth are those whispers who claimed it was all about the boy's inventions, to talk about those wooden discs and spinning toys and all else after that. With the king chastising the young knight as a true bastard for overshadowing him since the start of his reign. Whatever the truth, it made for perfect gossip to fill their hours. And as the royal city swelled with guests for the tourney, every tavern, keep, and corner of the street of silk hummed with humorous rumor. But for every voice that speculated in curious neutrality, there were two that spoke more envy and many that spat contempt. A bastard taking much fame, a bastard elevated to legitimacy, a lady made ruler of a house, a mere boy turned knight, they had much to dither on about. Much more so when the king extended great favor and made sure to have an audience with the two. Making them hatefully criticized that the Lady Rhea should have shame for parading the child that ruined her marriage to royalty, the sheer audacity. And those same mouths that cursed her name could not help but speak it out aloud with each other. For nothing livened a peaceful realm like scandal makers, especially the mother and son of Runestone. Lord Lyman Beesbury, however, did not lend his ear to the gossip mongers. He had little patience for whispers, but numbers. Those he adored. And the figures coming from the Vale lately intrigued him. He had heard of Runestone's curious resurgence, the sudden profitability of their fishings and animals, their improved trade, and the clever toys that fetched coin even in King's Landing's market squares. All traced back to that very boy that the king had given odd looks towards during the audience. In any case, the young bronze, as they called him, seemed to have a knack for making even dull metal shine. Lyman's beeswax merchants had dealings with the Waxleys that made candles, and through them, with the Royces, and all reports painted the same tale. A young knight who could turn idle labor into enterprise. A rare sort of mind, thought Lyman, one better suited for ledgers than lances. If such a boy could work wonders in the Vale, what fortune might he bring to the crown's coffers? It was a question worth pondering. Perhaps the boy's worth lay not in his dubious blood, but in his balance sheets. Lord Lionel Strong, meanwhile, weighed heavier thoughts. The Master of Laws had seen enough of the realm's tempers to know that one revelation, true or false, could shake kingdoms. The king's most obvious attempt to give recognition to the boy, even tentatively, was enough to embolden enemies and unsettle friends. He foresaw the ripple before it reached the shore. If Daemon truly had a son, the matter of succession would be raised again, and every ambitious lord would whisper of legitimacy, of precedence, of rights. The royal line, once doubted, would be doubted anew. Lionel sighed. It was a familiar story, and always the realm became unsettled for it. Yet even so, he could not dismiss the boy himself. He had read of the lad's deeds in the Vale, the suppression of a rebellion, the rise of a disciplined force, the clever construction of toys, and the development of ports and ships. Principal of which is the bronze giant he himself had seen from the docks. Clearly, Royce is a leader in miniature. Harwin had strength, and even Larys had his cunning, but this young bronze seemed to hold both in balance. Perhaps too much so. It was a strange feeling, for Lionel to slightly envy another person's supposedly bastard of a child, for being everything one hoped his own would be. Then again, he was a rational one and just continued to ponder more on the implications than anyone else. Lord Corlys Valerian saw it differently still. The boy's name and deeds stirred not only jealousy, but also curiosity. The master of ships eyed new vessels, thicker-hulled and bronze-banded, strange designs that withstood wind and wave alike. Ships that turned as quickly as a gull, yet carried the weight of a warship. Corlys had dismissed it, until he laid eyes on that tide-squashing beaut. It was enough to make the sea snake pause. Regardless of the boy's bastard existence or the king's unique attention. Perhaps there was worth in reaching out to the young bronze, in binding him to Driftmark's interests before others took even more notice. Which begs the question of how was he to do it, but his identity as the master of ships of this realm seemed to be one his decision is leaning towards. Using influence to make the boy part with what he knows, and mayhaps serve the Valerians using all of his potential. For his part, Lord Otto Hightower was neither shocked nor pleased. He was satisfied. For all unfolded as he had hoped, though not precisely as he intended. As he had made a gamble. And even orchestrated the talks about the bastard of Runestone being so much alike to Daemon when young. When whispers of this supposed resemblance first reached the king's ear, it had also been Otto's soft-spoken machinations that urged the man to see for himself. But Otto's intention was not to prove Daemon's claim nor was it to clear Lady Rhea's honor. 7 save him, but no. Otto's goal has been to sow just enough doubt to weaken what was already forming. Mixing truth with lies and lies with truth. The Hightowers had long ago learned that uncertainty served them better. So long as the king's gaze turned inward, toward family, toward scandal, toward self-doubt, the realm would stay steady under Otto's quiet hand. And so it did. With a seed of chaos already planted. For he and the maesters of the Citadel had long debated that the boy is Daemon's, and chances are that such truth will come to light in time. But why should Otto wait for that finality, when he can twist the process to serve his needs? And given the Lady Royce's hating eyes and the boy's presumably exasperated countenance at Viserys' painfully awkward accommodating, any chance of reconnecting should have been severed. Otto even hoped that a deep-seated grudge is already formed. With an already seated grudge being deepened. Worsened and festered. Enough to officially tear the bronzes away from the House of the Dragon, crippling Daemon's possible contingencies, and strengthening the chance for the beacons of Old Town to infiltrate the Iron Throne. For Ronan Targaryen was a variable that was calculated to be hard to take down. So, Otto Hightower is more than pleased with this turn of events, and how he manipulated the supposedly formidable young bronze as a mere piece in this Game of Thrones. As for Grand Maester Melas, he just found the whole affair to be a drag. The Citadel had long whispered of the matter, the bastard of Runestone whose birth coincided too neatly with Daemon's assertions. There had been debates, studies, theories, all very scholarly, all very dull. Especially when the bronze's brilliance was shining and shining. And now that the truth had almost come to court, Melas just felt detached. Especially as the king's response and reactions were so uncertain. Viserys had seen the boy and hesitated. And Melas, ever the loyal servant to crown and citadel alike, said nothing. He might have spoken, might have told the king that blood will show, that the boy's bearing, his manner, his gaze all might speak of dragon ancestry. Especially when tested with any dragon at the dragon pit. But alas, Melas did none of that. The high towers had their claws deep in Old Town and the maester's foundations, and Melos knew which way the wind blew. Besides, he was old and had grown weary of all this. Better to leave the boy's parentage for everyone else to scheme and ponder on. His duty now lay with the queen's swelling belly, and the child within it, a new heir, a new hope, a new distraction. Hopefully, it would be a talented dragon blood that can actually overshadow that young bronze. Chapter 30. Viserys expected the news to spread through the Red Keep. And sure enough, what began as whispers in the corridors soon grew into open talk in the courtyards, and by nightfall, it had already reached the city beyond the walls. Oftentimes it made him worry about the sanctity of the small council and their important talks, and how worrying it is that they seem to be easily spread elsewhere, in some shape or form. In any case, the main event of the day was not actually of the small council, but more on his meeting with Lady Rhea and her son. Of how the Royces met up with him, and how he just gave his greetings, apologies, and commendations. He wondered if these made the gossipers ponder, of how this audience might actually be about ascertaining Ronan Royce's lineage. Of how that boy, once living under a bastard's name and proven himself a knight of the Vale, had stood before himself under kingly scrutiny. And though the truth was yet unproven, and he himself was partial to the boy probably not being his nephew, the king was still in doubt. So, Viserys sat in his solar, looking at the stone moldings of his model of old Valyria, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the towers and bridges of his doomed ancestral empire. He stared at it for a long while before speaking. From being a babe to a strapping young man, Viserys murmured, more to himself than to anyone. My nephew, if he truly is that, has had to bear the weight of my brother's sins. All of our misguided faults. Queen Aemma sat close by, gazing softly by the fire. She looked to him when she heard the tremor in his voice. You speak of him as though you've already judged him so, she said gently. Viserys sighed, rubbing his temples. I speak as one who doesn't know what to believe. The boy is uncanny. Maybe Daemon's likeness is in some of his features, but his bearings are different. And so, he shook his head. I wonder if the whispered likeness is just a faulty rumor. Since the realm sees what it wishes to see. Aemma asked aside. And what do you see, husband? Viserys hesitated. I see a boy I do not understand. A boy who might be the blood of the dragon but more so just a half-bronze beneath the sun. He looked to her then, weary, uncertain. I could have asked her, you know. The Lady Rhea. I could have asked the question that now burns in my mind, and yet, I did not. Aemma tilted her head. Why? Because. He exhaled, bitterly. Because I always hesitate when it comes to matters like this. Because if I asked, I would have had to know. And if I knew, then I would have to act. He rose, pacing before the table, his hands clenched behind his back. If she said the boy was Daemon's, then that would make me the fool that was gullible enough to believe falsifications. Taint the judgment of my forebears and more so my grandsire, the conciliator. But if she said that the boy was not Daemon's, then I would be a bigger fool to think that she would say so. As adamant as she has been that the boy is of the House of the Dragon for years now. Either way, Daemon should be seeing insult where there was none intended. When I only mean to ascertain. And God's help me, Aemma. I am weary of quarreling with him. He stopped before the model again, staring down at its unique towers. So I choose silence and being clueless then and there. Currently standing here no wiser than before. Aemma rose quietly and went to him, laying a gentle hand upon his arm. You cannot blame yourself for this confusion that Daemon and Lady Rhea sowed long ago. We tried, and perhaps it is best that they resolve it amongst themselves. She does have my respect, you know. That Lady Rhea. Viserys admitted. Even when she was so visibly angered by my inactions earlier, she kept her temper. I thought she would make demands, but it would seem she's chosen to just bear it all in silence. Like she has this recent years. He sighed hard. And her son, as her prize son stood before me, proud and clever and far more composed than I expected. It really stunned me all the more, and perhaps maybe it's for the best that he grew up elsewhere. Even better that he continue to do so, with his heritage unclear as it is. Then decided as such. Aemma said softly. You are the king. Perhaps that boy is something else entirely, and he has no need for recognition as one of those with fire in his blood. For it is clear that he's already paving a way for himself, without the Targaryen name aiding him up or weighing him down. Viserys looked at her then, his expression softening. You make it sound so simple. It never is. She smiled faintly. But it must sound simple, or else you'll never sleep. He gave a low chuckle, tired but genuine. You always know how to ease me. Someone must. She teased lightly and tenderly she appeased. Whatever comes of this, whether the boy is truly your nephew or not. Or if it is your choice to let the ambiguity be. I will stand with you, Viserys. As I always have. He reached for her hand, pressing it to his lips. That, my love, is the only certainty I have left. They stood together in silence, the hum of the night wind echoing faintly through the open window. Outside, the city whispered and wondered. By their chambers, the king was resolving his uncertainties while the queen counseled her support. Creators. Chapter 31. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit establishment somewhere in the city, Daemon Targaryen stood by an open window. The sounds of onlooker laughter and music filled the open room he was in, but none of it seemed to reach him. Especially as he looked out at said window, with jaw tight. Frustrated that he wasn't to get a release once again, and no doubt it was because of all that has happened as of late. His lover whore, Mysaria, most probably frustrated as well for not achieving satisfaction, draped her naked self in silk. Then she approached him slowly. What troubles you again, my prince? Daemon didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the dark beyond the window. She watched him for a moment before moving closer. You know I could bring in another. She whispered with intentions to please. Perhaps a maiden. Or several more. I could even find one with silver hair, if that pleases you. Alas, the troubled prince did not respond, southwest she could only close in. Her voice made smooth as if coaxing. You are Daemon Targaryen, rider of Caraxes, wielder of Dark Sister. The king cannot replace you. Daemon didn't turn, though the tightness in his shoulders eased just a little. Even when this whore was far off from the mark. Still, he exhaled some of his trouble, but the weight of his thoughts remained heavy. It is for the best to not be spoken aloud. Still, he hated this feeling. For he feels as though the realm were laughing at him. Making a mockery of him. That every street corner and tavern was so close to talking of the son he disowned and the wife he wronged, about how near they are to blaming him for being at fault with the truth. Fortunately, it would seem that the fruits of his deception remained strong, with Viserys none the wiser. Even with what his brother intoned during that small council he intruded upon. And to think that Daemon believed it was only Otto's criticism of his gold cloaks that would trouble him for the day. Just recently did he know of the murmurs that threatened his years of denial. About how word spread that the boy was actually the very image of himself when at that age. Barring the hair and eyes, apparently. Such rumors were clearly exaggerations. And maybe manipulations. For even Daemon himself barely remembered how he'd looked at that age, and was quite confident that nobody would shine such a light on his lies. Alas, it has all come to this, with everything almost coming back to bite him. Fortunately, it didn't reach that point. As his sacrifices could have been undone. How he tainted his own reputation. Making himself out to be a cuckolded prince. With the only consolation being the fact that he was the one who cuckolded himself. And maybe that added consolation that the bronze bitch would be the one suffering for all of it. Suddenly, Mysaria's arms slid around him, pulling him away from the window. Eager for another round, perhaps. With their blatant onlookers waiting to watch again. Chapter 32. Across the keep, Rhaenyra wandered through the gardens and halls with the usual Alicent beside her, and then there's Ser Harold and another Kingsguard following suit. What's unusual about this whole matter is that they had Ser Ronan Royce to tour around. By special request of her own making. Fortunately, the young bronze obliged, despite all the resistance of plenty others to this turn of events. That special audience had been a curious one, but instead of getting to the bottom of its peculiarity, Rhaenyra was more curious about the young knight himself. Much more so, the creator of so many trinkets and toys that she had come to enjoy. And he was here in the Red Keep by virtue of her father's special invitation. Which should have lost out on its unclear purpose by now, and Rhaenyra was just taking advantage of the chance. To make an acquaintance, and that's all there is to it. None of the scandal that the Septas harped on about. And in all honesty, she wasn't sure what she had expected, perhaps someone quiet or sullen or boisterous, but Ser Royce was neither. None of the self-seriousness and arrogance that should have come from someone so accomplished. He spoke lightly, even joked about how people stared at him like some rare beast. He pointed out the Red Keep's odd angles and uneven stones, talked about the sea breeze from the bay and how it is not enough to get rid of the stench, and even laughed at how the accompanying guards stood too stiff for comfort. To Rhaenyra, he didn't seem to carry much fakeness and self-importance. He just was. He wasn't even looking at her and Alicent with those same looks that boys their age and men much older had, whenever in their comely presence. It may even be Alicent herself that seemed positively taken by him, but she hid it quite well with formality and politeness. Rhaenyra couldn't help but ponder. For all the noise and speculation around him, the young bronze was quite simple yet not really, and that all the more made him charming. In so many ways, that even the devout of a religion that bastardized bastards couldn't look away. Of course, with the boy knight's easygoing nature, she found herself insisting on questioning him with whatever else. Especially the boomerangs he came up with, an almost magical creation that she had been obsessed with when she was young. The frisbee that made throwing and catching all the more interactive. Hula hoops that she herself utilized to undeniably slim the hips from all the cake. Even that wood ball that she kicked at once or twice, but never really partook in the volleying of it. Only spectating enough to find it amusing as well. Those tops that she just flicked and let spin gently in fear of losing an eye or hurting somebody else. She even preferred the dreidels more. And there's the kites, the marvel that she uses to convince the more grounded Alicent about the greatness of flight. The Jenga towers that he actualized, a game that helped pass so many of her dull times. She and Alicent herself were also quite curious about wave riding, and how many in Runestone are taming the tides with elongated shields. They also had her curiosity about the Bronze Order and how he, who was as young as them, was able to command and train them himself. Asking how he was able to find the time to build an army and also continue with his game-making innovations on the side. The jumping rope was understandable, as it is apparently part of Runestone's routines. But what about the rest? Like the darts, famous in pubs and taverns. Wherein drunkards from taverns compete to throw pointy and hefty little arrows against a unique spiderweb of a board, the dartboard. Then there was the chessboard, where one can play chess, a debated game that is said to either be better or not at all up to par with the more established Sivas. Less of the mind and more a match of bodily movement is the badminton. With rackets and birdies that they and many others have been enamored with. The same could be said of the noble game of billiards, with sticks hitting on balls that then drop onto holes. And to move on from that fake lawn of greens, they wondered about the amusing and real lawn game of croquet. Played by the queen into quite the fondness in the unplanted gardens of grass, and the many ladies would want to play along, evolving into something almost akin to their version of the Lord's hunts. Made even more exciting if they include many of what's above. But apparently, there's a horseback version of the croquet, like the polo, which are said to be quite fascinating in their own right. Suffice it to say, within these 6 to 7 years, entertainment in Westeros and maybe even beyond have changed. By virtue of the young bronze that they are currently leading around the views of the Red Keep. And Rhaenyra can't help herself when she wanted to get to know him when he's here in person. Who can blame her, for even her own entourage were now the same when the boy knight expounded on his ideas and explained his reasonings. Eloquent and logical and elaborate, that she herself couldn't look away. Especially when he also nonchalantly retold his more martial pursuits, like the crushing of savages, pirates, and rebellious armies alike. Then about that huge ship docked by the bay, twice or maybe thrice the size of the dragon-headed ship that royal family always used for sea travel. It was clear as day that Ser Ronan Royce, formerly bastard of Runestone, was a boy of wonders. And one can only wonder of what he will achieve on his bright morrows. Even Rhaenyra can't help but look forward to it. Chapter 33. Those sure were an eventful couple of days. Ronan could say so for himself. To get called for by the king, being recognized as the man's nephew under the watch of the council, and then be the talk of the realm once again. Then again, one of those things didn't happen. Especially when he was kind of expecting it to. He actually walked into that room thinking that he'd leave with a completely absolved bastardry by ultimate kingly authority, with his mother having her honor restored, and his supposed father bearing all the brunt of the many incoming criticisms. Alas, it wasn't meant to be. Which kind of worked in his favor given that he didn't want to be roped into the Targs, but it still left a bad taste in his mouth. Oh well. It is what it is. It's not like this version of Paddy Considine had DNA eyes that could announce to Daemon and the realm that he is, in fact, the father. And even bonding with a dragon isn't that substantial of a solution. For even the bastard dragon seeds can claim dragons, which is enough to say that his illegitimate father that impregnated Lady Rhea might just be a dragon seed with tarred blood. Probably. And the tourney is not being held in Dragonstone, it's in freaking King's Landing, and Ronan was not too interested in the Dragon Pit stock. So, yeah, it is what it is, with Daemon's word against Mother Rhea's word, and only when those line up with each other will his heritage be cleared up somewhat. In any case, and afterwards, it was getting pestered by an overly curious princess like Rhaenyra among other things. There was Alicent too. The two people pivotal in the conflict to come. Taking the chance to enact fan behavior when getting a face-to-face opportunity with their idol. He's pretty famous for so many reasons, after all. And a meet and greet with the infamous Black Queen and Green Queen Dowager was fine for him. But then, while in this increasingly crowded and lively capital, he was an object of fancy for many other peeps. Like his other would-have-been cousins from the Valyrians, little Lena that had stars in her eyes when greeting him, and then there's Laenor, who had the hard eyes looking his way. And Ronan had not much to say about that, but their Uncle Vaemond dude was looking and acting annoying, especially with all those threats that are most likely backed by the sea snake himself. So, aside from fans, there clearly are haters as well. He's just that polarizing of a character for the realm, which is obvious enough. Bastards were very bastardized here, and as much as he considered himself above this very backward ideologies, it was still annoying when the idiotic sheeple gets up into his face with all the insults. That got annoying real fast. Even more so when he should have gotten out of it after the squashing of the Aerie rebellion. Alas, it wasn't enough when they're too stuck up in their ignorance or just butthurt envious of his success. Meaning that the only way to probably shut them up was to be proven as Daemon Targaryen's son. Which didn't seem to be happening anytime soon or probably never at all. Due to aforementioned reasons. Yet as much as he didn't want to be caught up in Targ problems, he still would have been fine with some of the recognition and absolution. Granted, his uncle of a king was exasperatingly meek and favored the continuance of the status quo, as evidenced by how he acted at that special audience. Hence, the negative aftertaste that lingered in him. In the meantime, he could only tolerate all that he's being dished with, but as soon as he can and after all this fiasco is over, he'll retreat back to his coasts in that chunky non-fingers peninsula of the Vale. With all that mentally said, he still had to be the show pony that everyone is oogling at, and it just so happens that he was currently taking part in the tourney's archery competition. So, after that quick contemplation and then exhaling his rationalizing frustrations, he let go. Hitting the target dead in the center, initiating many onlookers' applause. Begrudging some. Of course, to be more of a showboat, he knocked another arrow in and then let it loose. Hitting the same target dead center again, but splitting the still stuck arrow, to everyone's amazement. Haters included. Then again, he repeated the same reloading of his bow and arrow, and shot it once again. Hitting dead in the center for the third time, splitting the arrow that split the previous arrow. And at that point, most were in stunned shock and others were in horror. Cause, what in the bullshitting bullseyes were those? In any case, he won that event and walked off with a hefty number of gold dragons as a prize. To either pay off some of what he borrowed from Jane or just kick off another project entirely. Debts be damned. From the stands, Lady Rhea watched her son loose his arrows one by one. Each shot struck true, the second splitting the first, the third splitting them both. The crowd gasped, cheered, and murmured his name like they had always known it, like they hadn't spat it with venom years before. She sat tall, expression steady, though her chest swelled with a quiet satisfaction, even with all her brewing dissatisfactions. Her son had inherited her hand with the bow, no doubt, but he had turned it into something far beyond her own skill. Precision, confidence, showmanship, all of it his, and all of it earned. Her only vindication was what this was. For every insult whispered behind her back, for every sly smirk at court, for every false tale of her supposed shame. They were the ones who should hang their heads against her son's greatness. Accordingly, as the same ladies who once turned their noses now smiled and waved from across the stands, even a few lords suddenly remembered her name with syrup politeness. Rhea could barely keep the disgust from her face. The hypocrisy of it all was almost too much to stomach. Much more so when she and her son were dismissed as just that by the king once again. Offering false praises and wasting their trip with a forceful invite that led nowhere. She had her hopes up and it was wasted again. If not for her son's advisements and apostle, Rhea would not have known how to compose herself. So, from this point onwards, she truly will not expect anything from those damned Targaryens. Time will still tell her truth, but at that point, she could care less for their paltry excuses. She will refuse every last one of them. Her son will be Royce. As he always should have been. Ronan Royce. That was who he was, and who he would remain. Not a Targaryen. Not some ornament for the royal family to parade about when they eventually find themselves guilty. Her son was forged from their bronze, not the dragon's fire. And as she thought so, her planted hate couldn't help but grow some more, as the grudge she remembered is still far from resolved. meaning that these Targaryens better cross her no more. For the hells hath no fury like a woman scorned, after all. Chapter 34. In a specially built stadium, the main tourney was about to commence. Thousands of lords and ladies, small folk and merchants, all packed tight in a roaring, sweating sea of noise. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, spit, and dust. Flags fluttered wildly in the breeze, banners snapping from the wind. While the space between was about to be trampled by the pounding of hooves, the clash of steel, and the shouts of men. The stands were a riot of color, red and gold, blue and green, clothing and banners fluttering amid the din. The crowd mostly chattered excitedly, their voices rising and falling as they waited for the main event. Then the late Rhaenyra ascended a set of broad stairs, to a large balcony overlooking the chaos. The space was a patchwork of high seats and carved stone, reserved for the royal court and the council nobles. There, she found her place beside Alicent, whose face was set with a mixture of curiosity and concern. While nearby, a select few nobles and courtiers milled about, their voices echoing off the stone walls. King Viserys then stepped forward, a proud smile on his face as he addressed the gathering, his voice carrying over the tumult. Be welcome. I know many of you have traveled long leagues to be at these games. But I promise, you will not be disappointed. Rhaenyra looked out over the crowd, her gaze flickering from the excited faces to the chaos of the battlefield below. Her heart thumped. This was more than just the playful sports from Runestone. This was about power, spectacle, and a test of strength and honor. Her father, standing tall amid the other nobles, raised his voice again. When I look at the fine knights in these lists, I see a group without equal in our histories. And this great day has been made more auspicious by the news that I am happy to share. Queen Aemma has begun her labors. The crowd erupted into cheers, voices shouting and banners waving. The noise they made revealed the scale of the tournament, thousands of spectators packed into the stadium, a living, breathing beast of noise and color. May the luck of the Seven shine upon all combatants. Viserys declared, his voice booming. Alicent leaned in, her voice low. Where have you been? Rhaenyra glanced back at her, a hint of a smile. I checked up on Ser Ronan and his archery competition. Archery was a side show and needed a heftier space, quite a distance and distraction from the main event. Still, she watched as the famous young bronze took his shots and breezed through his competition. And how did Ser Royce do? Alicent questioned. Curious and regretful that she couldn't make it. He won spectacularly. Rhaenyra recounted with awe. Dead center for all his 3 shots in the same target. Splitting his own arrows to the shock of me and many. Gods, did he actually do that? Alicent asked, eyes wide. Can someone even do such a thing? Rhaenyra chuckled. It would seem that the young bronze can, and he did. Behind them, Viserys overheard, his face betraying nothing. Hiding his own amazement and shock. While Otto and those others who overheard the conversation can't help but also ponder. About how the famous boy knight was truly formidable in arms just as he is with his mind. Meanwhile, 2 knights were already clashing in the center of the stadium, lances lowered, charges thunderous. On the second run, one was dismounted, crashing to the dirt with a grunt. Cheers erupted from the crowd. The victorious knight approached the balcony, bowing low. Is that a mystery knight? Rhaenyra asked, curiosity piqued. No, a Cole, of the Stormlands, Alicent replied. Rhaenyra frowned. I've never heard of House Cole. Consequently, after some while, Bormund Baratheon rode up on his horse, approaching the balcony with a confident grin. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. I would humbly ask for the favor of the queen who never was. The nobles watched with varying expressions, amusement, suspicion, curiosity. Rhaenys could only step forward, dropping a wreath onto Bormund's lance. Good fortune to you, cousin, she said softly. Bormund smirked. I would gladly take it if I thought I needed it. Otto Hightower leaned over, whispering into Viserys' ear. You could have Baratheon's tongue for that. Viserys had no care for it. Tongues will not change the succession. Let them wag. Rhaenys then turned to her husband, Corlys Valyrian, exchanging a glance. The tension was thick enough to cut. Taking this reprieve, Rhaenyra gossiped. Lord Stokeworth's daughter is promised to that young Tarly squire. Lord Massey's son. Alicent doubted. The princess affirmed. They're to be married as soon as he wins his knighthood. A flicker of amusement crossed Alicent's face. Best get on with it. I heard that Lady Eleanor is hiding a swollen belly beneath her dress. Meanwhile, Bourmond and Criston Cole faced off in the joust. Bourmond was dismounted, sprawled in the dirt. Harold Westerling knelt beside Rhaenyra's seat after she called for him. "What do you know about this Sir Criston Cole, Sir Harold?" she asked. Harold hesitated. "I'm told Sir Criston is common-born, son of Lord Dondarrion's steward. But other than that, and the fact that he's just unhorsed both of the Baratheon lads, I really couldn't say." He rose and moved away as the field prepared for the next event. Just then, a Targaryen banner fluttered as a group of knights rode out into the field, flaunting and strutting around for all of the onlookers to see. To which, the Master of Revels announced, his voice rough and commanding, "Prince Daemon of House Targaryen." The crowd hushed, tension thickening. Daemon's arrival was a storm, his reputation for brutality cut like a blade through flesh. Coupled with the recent scandal of the gold cloaks, few even expected him to still partake. Even Rhaenyra felt her stomach unknowingly tensed. For she knew of her uncle's history with the Royces she's gotten acquainted with. And it would seem that none of them had faced off just yet, and she also remembered that they were all here, in this very stadium. Meaning that tension simmered just beneath the surface, ready to ignite. While the guests of this arena of a stadium waited, the air around them made thick with anticipation and the unspoken curiosity of what was to come. Chapter 35. Oblivious to the tensions of the crowd around him, the Master of Revels announced, "Prince Daemon of House Targaryen, Prince of the City, will now choose his first opponent." Acting as if he owned the place, Daemon rode out and surveyed the assembled jousters, eventually picking one wearing the Hightower sigil. With mocking intent, making Viserys and Otto exchange glances. Then the announcer shouted. For his first challenge, Prince Daemon Targaryen chooses Ser Gawain Hightower of Old Town, eldest son of the Hand of the King. Making Otto shake his head, knowing that the uncouthly prince was lashing out against him at that. Even when he only and just recently slighted the men with the City Watch incident. Corlys, on the other side, looks mildly amused. Regardless of the implications, the match must ensue, with Prince Daemon and Ser Gawain preparing to joust. Prompting Rhaenyra to grab the hand of Alicent, who looked nervous. While Coin Master, Lyman hands an attendant some money. 5 dragons on Daemon. He could be heard saying. Accordingly below. Daemon, smug enough to not shield his face, glanced at the crowd one last time to make eye contact with Otto before charging forward. While his opponent, Otto's son, charged on as well. The scuffle ensued, with Gawain Hightower proving to be the better juicer. And Prince Daemon is the one hit, resulting in the loss of his lance, but isn't dismounted. Otto, on the balcony, looked pleased. Still, the joust ensued. Both riders got new lances and charged forward again. But at the last second, Daemon swings his lance in front of the hooves of Gawain's horse, sending both tumbling over. An unfair move that should be considered an illegal one, but none is actually complaining, except perhaps the Hightowers who were watching. Fortunately, even when Ser Gawain was clearly injured, he still got up, with varying reactions from the crowd and nobles. And as the winner, Daemon rides in front of the balcony, while Rhaenyra and Alicent approach. "Nicely done, uncle," the princess said with decorum despite the issues he has. "Thank you, princess." Daemon accepted but then turned smilingly to the other girl. "Now, I'm fairly certain I can win these games, Lady Alicent. Having your favor would all but assure it." Alicent, expertly burying her dissatisfaction, grabs a wreath and shares a glance with her father, before dropping said wreath on Daemon's lance. "Good luck, my prince," she harped. Consequently, a maester whispers something in Otto's ear, who then relays it to King Viserys, as Rhaenyra and Alicent sat back down. Viserys looked nervous but still stood up to leave, confounding those who noticed his absence from henceforth. Then again, the tournament continued. And after a certain knight was dismounted, the crowd cheers. Obviously angered, the dismounted knight pulls his opponent off his horse and begins to attack him, to varying reactions from the crowd. "Kill him," was the most heard consensus, making Rhaenys comment. And the day grows ugly. And as the angered knights continue fighting, Corlys added, "I wonder if this is how we should celebrate the birth of our future king." His wife hummed while he continued. "With wanton violence. It's been 70 years since King Maegor's end." She reminded as someone tackled the attacking knight out of the way. "These nights are as green as summer grass. None have known real war." Their lord sent them to the tourney field with fists full of steel and balls full of seed, and we expect them to act with honor and grace. Rhaenys observed and bluntly stated. It's a marvel that war didn't break out at first blood. With all that said, the attacking knight slams his axe down, killing the other knight. The onlookers variably gasp or cheer, including Rhaenyra. While a squire vomits as the dead knight is taken away. To make way for the other fights that will follow soon after. After so many matches and with another dead knight is being dragged away, it was time for the next one. With the Master of Revel shouting. Ser Criston Cole will now tilt against Ser Daemon Targaryen, Prince of the City. So. Daemon and Criston prepared to joust, and then away they went. Horses charging, lances forward, and bam. But, neither was dismounted on their first go. As such, people looked on intensely as the duo grabbed new lances in a hurry and collided once again. This time around, Prince Daemon lands on the barrier in the center of the joust, just barely failing to get back on his horse before falling off the end. In a fit of anger, he pushed away him and helping him up, as the dominating Ser Cole dismounts. Sword. Is what Daemon shouted, and after a squire gives him Dark Sister, the loud announcer correspondingly shouted. Prince Daemon Targaryen wishes to continue in a contest of arms. And so, Criston approached the approaching Daemon with an odd choice of a weapon, the Morning Star. Lo and behold, they clashed, to everyone's excitement. One flailed his ball and chains while the other parried with a famed Valyrian sword. It was quite a match that one couldn't look away from. But alas, it had to end and one must prevail over the other. The prevailer happens to be Ser Criston, who hits the prince at an opportune angle, and then pinning one of his arms to the ground with his boot. Yield. The dark horse of a knight demanded. Yield. He repeated. With not much leeway and advantage. Prince Daemon eventually yielded, after many moments of pause, swatting Criston's offered hand away as he got up. Then turning to leave from the debacle, with even more frustrations than when he dashingly arrived. This jousting didn't really aid in alleviating anything at all. It more so just worsened the judging eyes that are directed his way. Especially as it was made clear that the Daemon Targaryen lost. In a manner that could be considered a shock to many who expected him to win. The Master of Coins, who lost his wagered coins, included. Chapter 36. While Daemon left defeated and Criston Cole was getting all the applauses, plus a wreath from Rhaenyra. Ronan watched on with a very happy smile. From after and in the midst of the crowd, his smile was quite obvious and very telling of how positively joyous he is. Granted that it's not because he wanted his deadbeat father to get his just deserts, but more on how lucrative it was for him to have the unknown Cole take the win. He's not some attention-seeking kid with weird daddy issues, after all. He was just someone who was going to be claiming hefty benefits from his father taking the L. 'Cause yeah. Ronan kind of wagered his prize coins in favor of the future oath-breaking Kingsguard, currently still a dark horse that's rising through the ranks. Debts truly be damned when you have the capability to double and even triple your money. And he didn't even need to break a sweat by participating and whatnot, 'cause why should he? It also helped that the odds of him losing out was almost zero when he already knew the results of the match. Perks that came from being a watcher of the show. Betting on Cole all the way until he is to fight Daemon, because that's as far as the show showed. Thankfully, he didn't butterfly effect enough to change the outcome, or else, it would have been such a monumental loss. So, a happy smile was what he had. Even itching to count those coins and coins of gold dragons already. Of course, besides him, his mother was smiling even happier. Though her satisfaction was the one that actually stemmed from Daemon's downfall, a vengeful vendetta, of sorts. Quite unlike his own, which was more pure. Pure financial gain. Unfortunately, life just has its way of balancing things out. If you're happy as can be at the moment, then expect that it will most likely be sad and somber in the next. Sooner or later. And as that tourney sort of wrapped up in its own way, the news broke that Queen Aemma has died, and the newborn Prince Balon didn't make it that long. Then again, Ronan was not invited to the funeral. So, he can only imagine sad people being present there on a large green field, gathered for Aemma and Balon's funeral, near rocky shores. Both being wrapped in cloth on pyres. Syrax sits on a hill at the edge of the field, waiting for her bonded rider's command. Alas, Millie was still grief-stricken and Patty just numb, prompting Matt to walk over to her and whisper in her ear. Probably saying something along the lines of how everyone was waiting for her and she's wondering whether his father finally found happiness when her baby brother lived. Matt would say she is needed more than ever by her father, while she just points out that she's a girl and will never be the son he wants. Ronan was only going with what he knew and remembered from the show though, and not at all the personal viewing that he expected to witness. In any case, to continue assuming by that script, Rhaenyra would eventually step forward, with Syrax watching her intently, waiting for her as she mournfully orders, "Dracarys." Then the dragon will crawl forward from its post, and light the funeral pyres along with the bodies of the queen and babe, bathing them in flames to inevitably turn to ash. As that probably went on, Ronan could only let out a sigh from his room on his big ship, because this was one of the eventualities that he was actually hoping to change. The coal betting was about taking advantage, but trying to prevent this birthing tragedy was more so to help out. Actively interfering for the good of others, more so the good of the probably kind aunt and the innocent baby cousin. Aunt and cousin of both him and Jane. Unfortunately, those gift trinkets of weirwood branchlets he ruined with labor and health had not taken effect as intended. Or the queen and her attendants may have misplaced those trinkets to anywhere else but her birthing chambers. After all, he was just the unimportant non-relative that was giving among the many other givers of gifts to the expecting queen. Then again, those were new runes that he just tried out during the ongoing trip. Maybe labor was more on energizing workers while health is wealth. So, maybe the two of them were just fated to go down the afterlife route and nothing he can do will change that. Ronan chewed on that possibility and could only sigh that the dance is probably still set to happen by all this logic. Had he been recognized then, he would have been motivated to act more, but at this point, it's not worth the trouble. Still, it's such a shame about what happened to the queen and the princeling. For he could have foregone with the runic mysticism that was easily dismissed and aided more proactively. But he doubts that his medical knowledge stuck in first aids can even do anything substantial against a breech birth and a rudimentary cesarean. Nor could he do anything about whatever struggles that the baby Balin went through as a result of those prior complications. Which is fluid buildup in the lungs, probably. Those all the more just pushed Ronan to really do his due diligence on those issues and hope that heaven still rewards him with knowledge that the women and babies of this world needs. Admittedly, Ronan wasn't that much of a saint and he didn't really owe anything to the Ascent mother and son to do so. But yeah, the field of medicine and the science of healing should be quite interesting to tackle. Soon enough, some time passed, and the succeeding events were more dramatic than the next. And Ronan could only remain as someone who continued to hear the rumors and murmurs of it. Fortunately, there's still his meta know-hows from watching the show. Like how a quick council should have been called just after a few hours of mourning by the next morning, to finalize who is to be heir to the throne, with Balin not being there for the king to count on. Prince Daemon was the previous and most obvious choice, but not many really wanted the second coming of Maegor the Cruel to rule. The Princess Rhaenyra was an option, but that just had as much deniers as the nomination of Princess Rhaenys. So, Daemon it should have been. Alas, it didn't help that Ronan's biological father was mourning in the most stupidest way possible. The heir for a day was not a comment that the king liked, and that got the men who just got an L to get another L. To be shooed away and stripped off his status as heir. And so, the running was down to just Rhaenyra. With Rhaenys and her line out of the count, cause the king probably didn't like that Corlys attitude that Corlys had. Making Ronan already guess what was about to happen next. And as of now and present, Rhaenyra could be seen up front, gazing upon the enthroned King Viserys as he declared. I, Viserys Targaryen, first of his name. King of the Undulls, and the Rhoynar, and the first man, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm, do hereby name Rhaenyra Targaryen, the Princess of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne. Prompting all of those assembled in the Great Hall to bow their heads. Having just bent their knees and given their oaths, with this kingly order officially finalizing it. Ronan was among them, near his mother who served as representative to the liege lady of the Vale. He was neither happy nor sad, just a participating spectator, even though he could have been a contender. Then again, he also felt weirded out. 'Cause Rhaenyra, who just looked back to the crowd, was looking at him very intently, specifically out of all those present in front of her. And he could only wonder what the heck that is about. She really should just be looking straight at the camera and the credits should be rolling right after. Chapter 37. Not that he really wanted to find out or even could, because Ronan got out of there as soon as he was able to. After that forceful acceptance of a female heir, the lords and ladies that only expected a name day tourney were finally allowed to leave, taking their qualms and opinions with them. And given that Royce entourage, specifically Lady Rhea, held a deep-seated grudge that almost blew up during the bowing and oathing to the Targs she loathed, Ronan could only retract his cool anchors back. Then letting his efficiently designed sails catch the wind ASAP, moving the huge ship through the waves with enviable speeds. hoping that the Santa Maria will influence his mother Rhea to be a saint and sagely forgiving. Granted, he actually just reminded her that Daemon got booted off to someplace else, and that soothed her somewhat. On the other hand, it had been quite the tumultuous times for Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. It all came too fast and too heavy. First, her mother's screams apparently echoed through those halls again, another battle in the childbed gone wrong. Only that in this instance, it was her dear mother that was taken from her. As for her new brother, his life was also cut short soon after, only lasting for less than a day. And as much as she also grieved for Balon, Rhaenyra had loved her mother much deeper. Queen Aemma had been her comfort in the storms, her voice of calm whenever trouble was brewing in this keep and beyond. Losing her was like losing the sun, making Rhaenyra feel hollow, furious, and frightened all at once. That fury found its target in her father. For it was him, O King Viserys, who had ordered the maesters to do everything, even the gruesome cutting, in the hope of a son. He had pushed her mother beyond her strength, and in the end, it cost both her and the child. Rhaenyra never said the words, but she blamed him. She blamed her father for all of it. But then, her anger grew colder when she heard what her uncle Daemon had done. Mocking the dead babe as an heir for a day. She had once admired her uncle's daring spirit. Now she felt disgust. For it was a cruel jest, from a cruel man. Supposedly abandoning his own son was one thing, but to mock her poor brother like so was too much. Then came the shock of being named her father's heir. A girl. A daughter. One who would inherit what no woman had before her. It broke a century of tradition, and spit on the precedent set by the Great Council and make a mockery of Princess Rhaenys, the queen who never was. At first, she didn't know whether to feel honored or trapped. Her father's eyes were full of guilt when he told her why and everything else that came with such a responsibility. She was told about Aegon the Conqueror's dream, the Song of Ice and Fire, and the price of knowing such a thing. The weight of that secret was heavier than any crown. She was told it was her duty to carry that burden, to prepare for a threat that might never come. That she should be the one to pass this duty to the next. And at that mystical justification, Rhaenyra had not much else to say, not much to react, nor any more to protest. She just felt trapped altogether, in a life that she no longer had control over. Stuck in a path that her king of a father was forcing her to take. But what shocked her after was finding out she might actually have a cousin living in the Vale all these years without proper recognition. The very young bronze that she had locked her eyes on. The Royces claimed for years but it was never given attention to. Even she dismissed it as such and just saw a respectable knight who rose from a bastard identity. With his own wit and might. But then her father told her of when he struck Daemon from being heir, her rogue uncle then and their claim that he had a son, an heir that could replace him. Clearly, her uncle's desperate and spiteful last move against them. And it was the boy that he announced to be not be his, all these years. The boy he had abandoned, if his lies are to be believed. Alas, the paths were already set, and all this deception has only worsened the uncertainty and disbelief. And without waiting for any more verifications of the truths and clarifications with those they should have, she had already supplanted and taken over the potential claim. So, she gazed at him in the crowd with guilt and uncertainty. And just as her father and herself were about to finally clear up the matter, justify their cause, and right some of the potential wrongs to the Royces, that great bronze ship had already defied the tempo of the winds and temperance of the waves, putting many seafaring houses and their prized vessels to shame. Chapter 38. It was finally the home stretch, and Runestone's port was within sight. And yes, it's just a port or a whole big dock now cause he's had those scant few link up. Or at least it's on the way to being one, for it still would take quite the lot of effort, resources, and time to make a coastal city that hugs the shoreline. Not to mention the accommodating the already rare sand beaches in his planning, for them to be untouched or incorporated responsibly. And wouldn't you know it, they are currently surfed up by some wave riders. In any case, the state of things was noticeably better than how it had been. With the ports only being fishing villages and seldom partaking in trades. However, under his nudging, woodcraft had shot up with him introducing plundered games and toy ideas every once in a while, even after the pot gardenings and being caught up with the shaping of the order. But those weren't the only industry that this developing runesport was depending on. For even fishing was something he dabbled in, like spearfishing ideas and crab cages, and he even asked the most experienced fisherman to share his skills and tricks. Then writing it down, rereading it until he mastered it, then writing down improved notes, mastering that too, then there were even more improvements to ink up, mastered that as well, and so on and so forth. And at the point when he became satisfied with the optimization, he shared it back to the fishing locals, to which they soaked up what they can, making it so that they became generally great fishermen in the local peninsular waters, but also for narrow sea harvestings as well. Those huge nets and multi-boat configurations of fishing formations that he himself designed and lent out were hauling in the big schools. That, in turn, led him to fish processing pursuits like the infamous salted fish, smoking, and backward sardining, which was then supplemented by the locals making delicious fish delicacies for the still fresh catch. And he's also experimenting on all those seaweed-growing stuff, but his eyes were more on high-level and eco-powered pearl farming, which was just more rewarding on so many levels. The time investment on that was not low though. Then again, those were just the more marine-based industries, as the more inland and tumultuous hillscapes of Royce territories were something he had made developments in as well. Husbandry and old MacDonald ing is the path he took with that. Like the poultry farms, with dedicated egg-collecting barns, with free-range and even mountain-range options. Because chickens are just staple food providers that he knew of. Alas, the fried chickens here still hasn't reached the crispiness that he missed. But then cows and pigs were also being raised for their milk, beef, and pork, but not as much, given some restrictions that he had to get around. Then there's the breeding of horses that was a given that he had a nightly order and it was just that much of a necessity for medieval inland travels. The rumored Zorses would have been a choice, but those toe feeds are quite the distance away, and he might as well just crossbreed to maybe match whatever ferocity the Dothraki horses are having. Consequently, he had the idea of acquiring those said to be unicorns from Skagos, to maybe make mountain trekking horses that would be perfect for the Vale, but all in due time. At the moment, he did have goats, or the truly mountain goats to work with, but it was more so on milking their unique goat cheese and whatever. Funnily enough, he made use of a book that a lactose-intolerant maester made. Lactose intolerance still isn't a familiarized thing however, and the maester was just that fond of milk even when his stomach didn't agree. So, he was stubborn to process it all, and bada boom. Ronan capitalized on his work and improved upon it. But he digressed, 'cause there's sheep in these lands as well. And to paraphrase his biological father, here, the sheep that are prettier. Also plentier and fluffier, so that their coat be processed as wool. To such an achievement, he even popularized the song Ba Ba Black Sheep. All in all, it was still introductory but pretty solid already, with all the shit and fly problems given appropriate and advancing solutions as well. With all their byproducts, minus the shit, flowing into the ports, bolstering the port's trade options. And instead of just waiting for seafaring merchants to stop by, why not caravan it to sea himself? Which is why ship development is also noticeably bolstered, from the one-masted bronze cogs that float about while bat-sailed bronze junks do the same. It was the rudimentary fleet he had built up from the constant innovation with toy boats, then rowboat DIYs from the fishing locals, and then forcefully apprenticing himself to a shipwriting business in the more established Gull town. It was a step-by-step but also a heavenly rewarding process that awarded him with the Santa Maria he was standing at present. On that note, he turned to his mother Rhea beside him, and noticed that she was fairly calm now. Kind of like how she was still able to hold it in during that awful audience with King Viserys, but then she was almost erupting during the ring ceremony. So, he could only wager that it must have been that unfortunate time of the month, or just myth that her son could have actually been the heir being bowed to, instead of the princess. Highlighting the need to port the ship and let her rest in Runestone, the centerpiece castle of the progressing and tentatively named Runesport. For it is a land of runes and not just bronze. And his home that's hopefully far enough away from whatever mess the Targaryens are about to go through. Something that he really worked his ass on, and he didn't want to trade that away to sit himself in an uncomfortable chair of pointy swords. Chapter 39. Away from annoyances that remind him he's a bastard and his mother a whore. And secluded enough from the hypocritical politicking. Ronan eventually settled back to the usual. The groove he casually has whenever he's back home, and maybe even start preparing for the campaign that Jane requested before the whole Targaryen tourney tragedy. It was kind of a big deal, and maybe his debts will be erased when he gets it done. 'Cause, he's decided that the golden dragons he just acquired are to be used on other stuff. So, he was quite looking forward to it. What he wasn't looking forward to, however, was a raven that brought one of those rolled-up little letters. Missives, from his dismissive uncle of a king once again. Talk about timing. That was too little too late. 'Cause Daemon spilled all the tea apparently, and Viserys was now open to the idea of actual fact-checking. A more thorough one. Even when it should have been done then and there during that farcical audience, after all those special invitationals that really just wasted their times. And at this point he really couldn't care less, especially when he mostly got the bastardy complaints out of his system. It just was the rumor mill atmosphere and the obvious Karen attitudes of King's Landing peeps that got under his skin, and since he's at the comfort of home, he was over it already. Mostly. And given that he is once bitten, he'll probably be twice shy. Or just plain shamelessly hard to get. Consequently, his mother must have arrived at the same conclusion, wherein she ordered the maester to set aside any letter from the king or anything else in relation. No replies are to be sent back, and she even requested that they be burned directly without reading any of their contents. As long as they have that royal seal or any small council indicators. Of course, Ronan just let her do what she wants, and even found it funny. 'Cause her actions were the Raven messaging equivalent of blocking and ghosting certain contacts. Contextually, it could actually be perceived as a rebellious move or something along the lines of disregarding the crown. But the Targaryens should at least allow the woman to throw her tantrums. It's the least they can do, after all that fiasco, and many years prior of wrongings. So, with all that left to its devices, he just continued to go back to his routine, and prep for what is about to come next. The heir's tourney had ended in ill omen, or so Lady Jane Eyre came to judge it at the earliest. From the first boast of the king, that the babe in Queen Emma's womb is to be a son, she had felt unease stirring. Pride and unfounded certainty often led men to folly, and now it seemed the same spirit of hubris had killed her dear aunt. Jane had not been in attendance. The Vale could ill afford her absence for long, not when lords still murmured over the matter of her rule. Yet tidings of the tourney and all that followed came swiftly to the eyrie, carried by ravens and tongues alike. Her aunt, Queen Emma, was dead in childbed. While the long-awaited son, though not stillborn, was still not able to make it past a day. And though the king had named his daughter Rhaenyra as heir, many whispered that it was done in grief, not in foresight. To Jane, it was a cruel twist of fate. Aunt Emma had been among the few of her kin who spoke kindly of her right to rule. The very queen who had lent her words of encouragement in the days when the Vale still wavered with the decision to seat her as a paramount. But she was gone now. All the relatives that remained were men of Arryn blood, circling like hawks, awaiting their chance to strike at her. A bunch had already raised up arms in a failed rebellion, while even the docile Arryns of Gulltown seemed to be scheming something with ambition. Now, with her support from the Iron Throne fallen into the stranger's hand, Jane's standing had become more fragile. The death of Queen Emma, the king's folly, and the ascension of a young girl as heir, each echoed her own struggle. Rhaenyra Targaryen was kin, even if distantly, yet Jane could not help but see the shadow of her own plight in the princess's fate. Both were women in seats meant for men. Both were destined to be tested for it. Still, Jane had her duties. When the summons for the oath-giving came, she had sent not herself but her bannerwoman, Lady Rhea Royce, as her representative. Time constraint and distance-wise, it seemed a prudent choice. Another woman whom she thought would have her troubles resolved during their trip away. Her late aunt's earlier attention and scrutiny of the runestone lady and the young bronze through her wasn't exactly secretive, after all. And Jane easily surmised what it was for. For the blood and truth of Ronan Stone, whom she herself turned into Ronan Royce. About the hidden reality that he should have been Ronan Targaryen all along. But alas, none of it was resolved due to the many complications that had arisen. Alas. An heir of the dragon dismissed once again. Dismissed of his birthright all this time. As Jane herself did not doubt the honor of the Royces, due to her care under Lord Yorbert. They, as falcons of the moon, may have ousted the Bronze Kings, but that has become old history at this point, with the years of relations that they cultivated. For what it's worth, the young Bronze can now ensue with the campaign they had agreed upon. And as ambitious as it was, Jane felt that it could be done, given that it was Ronan himself that guaranteed it. Chapter 40. It had been within the quiet assumption of many Bronze Order members that with Ronan's return to Runestone, their next course of training would concern the sea. More precisely, the handling of that great new ship of his, the Santa Maria, fresh from its maiden voyage and already the talk of the Vale. And beyond. Willem Royce had seen it with his own eyes and even had a hand in making bits of it, a vessel so large and strange that it seemed not just a product of shipwriting but also sorcery. Built of interlocking timbers and banded with bronze where the frame mattered most, it was a marvel to behold. Oh, how it defied convention. Amongst the Royces, who had always been warriors of mountain and stone, the sight of such great a ship resting in Runestone's harbor felt like a new age breaking upon their shores. The Bronze Age he privately fashioned it to be. To Willem's mind, such a ship demanded a new sort of discipline. And so, he had thought much on what must be learned to handle such a beast of wood and bronze, or at least been told of what must he learn. Like how to read the wind, raise, reef, and trim canvas so that the ship answered swiftly to command. There's steering and navigation, for the sea has no road nor border, only stars and current to mark the way. Anchor handling and mooring to hold such weight steady against storm or tide. Coordinating the crew. As for every order, it must be relayed in rhythm, else confusion turns to calamity. One must not forget maintenance and repair, the care of rope, hull, and sail, lest one rotten line undo the whole. Last but not least, was combat at sea, how to turn broadside, how to ram, and how to fight upon rolling decks without losing footing or blade. Ronan, however, made it all seem effortless, explaining the ship's workings in the same casual way he once spoke of his toys. And Willem, though born to the hills, found himself enthralled. The idea of steering such a massive creation through open waters, of riding the waves like knights rode destriers, stirred something new in him. He had even grown fond of the dragon boats that Ronan devised, long, narrow craft meant for swift rowing, their prows carved with bronze-painted dragon heads. They were meant to serve as a contingency should the Santa Maria be unable to dock in shallow waters. Little boats to be readied on the biggest of boats. Each was to be manned by the Bronze Order, who will row with such rhythm and fury that their approach will look like an army of beasts swimming toward battle. It was like jogging with cadence, but in water. Ronan had even spoken of organizing dragon boat races at some point. Much like the miniature carriage derbies he had once held to entertain children and visitors alike. The notion made William intrigued, and he admired the ingenious ambition all the same. Yet when the time came for their next great task as an Order of the Bronze, it was actually not to the sea that Ronan turned his gaze. It was to the mountains. For he had apparently been tasked by Lady Jane Eyre herself, to avenge the blood of her kin slain by the stone crows of the high passes. The late Lord Eyre and her dead brothers, who should have taken the heavy responsibility she was forced upon. A grudge long in the making, and she believed that it would be the young Bronze who will appease her. As even now, in spite of prior attempts, the stone crows remain mocking. But as ever, Ronan sought to go further than any request required. He did not mean to oust a single clan. He meant to catch them all. Like Pokemon, as he muttered. For the mountain clans and hill tribes had long plagued the Vale. They were no mere bandits. They were a way of life that refused to die. Willem, like most Royces, had fought them before and knew well why they endured when so many kingdoms changed and fell. The mountain clans are fearsome for many reasons. They know every rock and ridge, almost as if the land itself fights for them. Even more so than Vale locals like them. They even vanish like smoke after every striking, for their homes are caves, cracks, and secluded forests without road or map. They also happen to travel light, living off what they steal or hunt, no supply line, no baggage, no burden. Leaving their settlements at the first sign of insurmountable danger. And they breed warriors young, teaching bow, sling, and jagged blades long before the seps or maesters teach the civilized squires to be. And yes, they breed, inexhaustibly so with their wild wives or the unfortunate lass that they've taken captive. Meaning that their numbers never seem to dwindle, and even flourish at a certain point. By then, they strike with greater fervor and apt cunning, preferring ambush to open war. Setting traps when they can. Accordingly, most of them just have nothing to lose, and so, they mostly fear nothing. Only living and surviving with an ancestral feud that they just can't let go. Fostering new hatred with the civilized folks of the Vale with the passing of each generation. Making it so that there's plenty of reason why they stood the test of time. The houses of the Vale had endured their raids for centuries, and more with the lords and ladies of the Vale having no choice but to get used to it. So when Ronan claimed that their Order of the Bronze, only over 1,000 strong, could eradicate the troubles of the Vale completely, Willem thought him half mad. And yet, he had seen enough of the young Bronze to know that what sounded like madness often turned to marvel. If anyone could turn the Vale's plague of troubles into clean victories, it would be Ronan Royce. The former bastard who they said dreamed too high, yet still made the world bend a little closer to meet what he is owed. Like the Targaryen troubles that remained unresolved even after that king-requested trip, but Willem did not doubt that Ronan will eventually claim a satisfying end to such qualms. In his own terms at that. Chapter 41. As it turned out, Ronan did have his methods. Something that he had in the ready, for a while already. Part of his plan, oddly enough, focused around dogs. Willem remembered well the day Ronan sought out the shepherd from the foothills of Royce lands. An old man, weather-beaten as cured leather, who claimed to have a bond with his dog stronger than with his own kin. Ronan had sat with him for hours, asking after every detail, how the dog learned the whistle calls, how it protected sheep from wolves and even shadow cats, how it circled, pressed, and steered animals without ever biting except in dire need. Herding dogs were clearly doing more than just following orders. They watched the flock's edges, kept stragglers from wandering off, and shifted as one with the shepherd's steps. They nipped at heels only to correct, never to harm. They remembered paths better than most men and could turn a whole herd with nothing more than a shout or snap. Loyal, tireless, clever, born to read both land and livestock alike. And Ronan took all that down in pages upon pages of neat paper. As he always did, he pored over those notes for many days presumably, and by the end of it, he had what he boldly called a manual for training shepherding dogs. To share for other sheep herders to learn, while Ronan himself was already able to implement such knowledge with uncanny proficiency. But he did not stop there. He found a hunter next, one whose dog could follow a week-old scent through forest, stream, and stone. Again came the questions, again the writing, again the poring through those texts for so many nights, as Ronan most likely worried over its every detail like a dog with a bone. From this, he fashioned something like the shepherding dog book before it, and using that, he tasked certain dog lovers of the order into a team he named the K9 Unit. Or was it K9 Unit? Either way, Willem still thought he could have simply called them Mutt Bunch or Hounds Keeper like any normal man of Westeros. Even so, the K9 Unit and their dogs led the way into the mountains, noses down, tails sharp, guiding the Order of the Bronze to any sign of tribe or trail. But even that was only the beginning. Or just part of it. For they were not the first to use elite hunting dogs in this kind of endeavor, and those prior failed with just this. So, Ronan paired the dogs with birds. Falcons. Hawks. Even bloody eagles. Leading the falcons was Captain America. For the hawks, it was a hawk named Dove. While the eagles had a so-called prime eagle that Ronan named Eagly. Regardless of those odd names, each had a horde of full-winged creatures that circled above the men's line of movement. With their shrill calls ringing off the cliffs, guiding the men toward movement on the slopes or figures slipping between the trees. It was falconry, hawking and eagle hunting, but twisted into some new form that only Ronan seemed to invest in. Instead of just hunting them as prey, the birds were now fully used to actually hunt people. Spotting any other mountain dwellers with a bird's eye view that was hard to match, and conveniently convey that information with their natural call. Willem could scarcely believe it when Ronan explained he'd simply found a bird trainer and expanded the man's notes, like usual. For there was something else at work here, something Willem could not name, and mayhaps he was better off not knowing. But then Ronan, God save him, spoke of improving the Vale's raven posts by replacing them entirely. He claimed that either messenger hawks or messenger eagles could intercept enemy ravens in flight, tearing them down before they reached their roosts. Using that intercepted message to one's advantage. Dishonorable was what Willem muttered it to be, but when it works, it probably will. Making for effective tactic of war that Willem could not argue with. And he could only pity any enemy who relied on ravens still, for Ronan meant to make their skies a one-sided battlefield. Even sea eagles, he said, could serve the future fleet, loosed as living signals, each bird marked to tell the captains when to turn, to close, or to retreat. Willem thanked the gods for Ronan's curious madness, for without it, Runestone might never muster such strange and potent knowledge. But when they came upon a deep and shadowed cave, and Ronan, calm as a maester in his study, let loose a cluster of carried rats to scout its holes and hidden ways. 'Twas the moment Willem decided he would ask no more questions. His curious privilege as a close cousin didn't matter anymore. For birds and dogs were one thing. But rats. Rats. No man should be able to command such creatures. Nor whispering anything that they can even understand. But Willem knew well enough when to stop prying. When it became a bit too much to believe. Whatever strange and odd talents the young bronze possessed, it was wiser, and safer, to let them be. And yes, if it's not clear just yet, something simple as sniffing dogs, trained birds, and Pied Piper shit isn't enough for the task Ronan gave himself. The training of the K9 unit was as real as can be though, but it still needed a bit of work. Especially when he prioritized herding dogs for all the sheep stuff. Which made all the bird stuff all the more suspicious. Even though he actually did convene with someone who's good with birds, and he even backtracked to how the Raven messaging system functioned. But those were not enough just yet to let fly different species of conflicting birds all at once, and make them cry out whenever they see any sign or the actual presence of Vale wildlings. So, yes, he employed another cheat to speed things along. 'Cause all the toddler facade of saying bird whenever the falcons or ravens cried beyond the window, was obviously deep cover for something else. The chasing of the falcon's shadow across the courtyard and whatnot, when he was but a wee little boy, was a front as well. And it all roots back to the little VR game he improvised when he was just an actual little babe. Being a baby was just that boring as heck, and in such a circumstance where he can't do much, he found out that he actually can. Which he figured out when a huge freaking rat closed up on his swaddled mini form in the middle of a certain night. And no amount of his wah-wah ing seemed enough to scare it off or wake up his breastfeeders. It was almost a chubby giant when compared to his little form, after all, and he didn't know whether it'll just sniff him up and shit all over him, or maybe the rat actually wanted a piece of juicy little him. So, in that overthinking panic, something triggered, and before Ronan knew it, baby him had his eyes all white. Not because he passed out, but because he actually passed his consciousness to the too close for comfort rat. Meaning that he actually changed his skin as a skin changer, and literally Worgen timed. Skipping the introductory dream sequences, and jumped right away. Which was the start of his self-made VR game that he called Reverse Ratatouille, truly exploring the crevices of Runestone, cause a persistent rat culture seemed to be a staple in Westerosi castles. Accordingly, like all else, after the 100th rodent warging, the page gave out rewards. In the form of an improved skill in skin changing. Meaning that conspicuous white eyes no more. And the more he repeated the process, his proficiency rose and his skill got upgraded. Obviously, given that he was a hapless baby when this all kicked off, he really grinded this magical skill to the max that he could. Moving on from just one rat, to 2 rats, to multiple rats at once. He was then eventually able to simultaneously move himself as well. Comatose begone. And drats was what he simultaneously set out, when he got spotted at times to be mingling with his rat hive. In any case and for fun, he even made a rat king, cause the damage feedback was cut off already, due to the multi-upgrades that the ability went through. Of course, after rats, it moved up to stray VR, and he may have went overboard at one point, accidentally testing out the stray cat's fall negation. And yeah, that ended badly for some cats, so the sad, meow meow ma meow was all he could offer them. Safe to say that familiar and familial bonding was no necessity for his version. Which circles back to present time, where he's using multiple birds as flesh drones for his manhunt, and utilizing the familiar rats once again for cave diving. All in all, the ability was nifty, and he can probably chalk it up to the fire in his blood being a catalyst for this first men magic. Even when he also awakened rune magic further down the line as well. Chapter 42. With this kind of configuration, Ronan felt that he was all set, and wouldn't you know it, their next major encounter is about to begin. With their list of scuffles at present only being from the daring soloist and little scouting teams that stood no chance. For in this dark crack of the mountain, lies a deeper cave system within. Which sort of reminded him of Minecraft, or maybe just actual caves themselves. Using the rats as his eyes, he explored, weaving stems and using caps as cover. Through them, he had plenty of poor and blurry visions, but it was all more than made up for with sensitivity to motions, and heightened smelling and hearing. And after a sneaky and thorough check, by all accounts, about 49 cave people were actually cave diving here. Or they might truly just be cave living. So, he'll call them the Croods for now. And after a quick convening, the plan was simple. Ronan volunteered himself to be bait, and have himself be chased out by the savages that his rats apparently found out to have been living in a dark underworld. He would go in alone, stir them up, and run. While they were to wait outside, hidden, and take them once they left the safety of the cave. And as much as they had objections to their young lord's bravado, they can only assent when he's quite persuasive. They usually just give in, and he does as he pleases. And so, after a while of waiting, Ronan ran out smiling, while a whole tribe, armed with stone tools, came charging out in droves. It really made one wonder what he's done inside to earn such ire within that short span of time. With the cave dwellers literally leaving their dark homely advantage and going into open light with angered fervor. But against bronze-armored and steel-armed warriors who trained to better themselves every day, they were just no match. Once they stepped into open ground, their advantage was gone. More so when they're pitifully few against hundreds and hundreds strong. So if possible, the awaiting Bronze Order even used non-life-threatening methods, or showing restraint when they can. Like netting up a bunch and then knocking the inconvenience down, courtesy from all their forced net fishing practices and boxing till KOS. Many of them also used the unique boladoras to just ensnare the charging wildlings by their legs. 2 balls upon a rope used by slavers across the narrow sea, but incorporated into the bronze as fugitive entrapment. Aside from those, they're also wrangling those they can with lassos. And then there's the young bronze, expertly using a lasso against plenty, not for entrapment but using it as a literal whip onto heads to make them sleep. Of course, the more bloody confrontations could not be avoided entirely, with the truly stubborn and bull-headed savages falling to their deaths. Feudal demises were what those were. Accordingly, one can't help but wonder why not just end all of them right away, but Ronan reasoned that they needed to find a balance. For he says that doing a massacre was bad for the reputation, and there's no need to unnecessarily end bloodlines. Case in point was when some of them were tasked to round up the leftovers inside, with a handful of barely lucid women and thin babes being the one that brought out. Showcasing the order of the reality that most of these tribes and clans are composed of. Victims and innocents that still had a chance. Nevertheless, against the shroom folk that these barbarians fashioned themselves to be, the Bronze Order was victorious. Which was the fourth or so against many more to come. Accordingly, while his men were wrapping up, like processing the dead bodies, the captives, and little babes, Ronan explored this cave some more. A relatively dark place with high humidity and coolness that should truly support fungal growth, the very shrooms that the stubborn shroom folk have cultivated. Such a shame that they weren't actually called the Croods though. Of course, it's also a shame that this cave didn't seem to be some secretive gold mine or whatnot. Until further notice, that is. Maybe that just goes to show that this mountainous vale really didn't have those rich mineral deposits that should have been expected. But, as described, it is as fertile as the Reach, with its underbelly being able to grow unique fungi like these. Shrooms that actually glow and must have served as light source for its prior inhabitants. So, glowshroom is what he'll call this plundered discovery. Then again, there's still many other shrooms in this cave system, and it made sense why these folks didn't seem to be notorious much in the area. Alas, they're still part of the considerably hostile and uncivilized, with them munching on a certain shroom at the sight of him and becoming berserkly territorial. At least it made his aggro job easy peasy. Of course, there's also hallucinogenic shrooms that those left behind women must have been drugged up with. So, if it wasn't clear just yet, this was a collection of unique mushrooms here and there, and that should at least count as a considerable and unexpected bonus. Cause, he probably can't say the same for the next batch that he'll meet up with. Chapter 43. Using that mushroom encounter as momentum, the Order of the Bronze continued on with their streak. With one hill tribe falling after another, none being able to evade or escape. And before long, the Royce lands and the house territories of those adjacent to them were suddenly freed from the worry of unwarranted raids and ambushes. That recurring trouble was gone for good, and it felt too good to be true. And it actually was an undeniable fact, especially with local lords opening up their dungeons to imprison all the captured scum. The defeated savages were there, all awaiting due process and due justice, unprecedented throughout the Vale's history. And it was the Royces, the Bronze Order, and the very young Bronze that they had to thank. Of course, the overachieving heroes had no time for the gratitudes, generous praises, and perhaps all the hypocrisies. They still had hill tribes to get to, or maybe it should be mountain clans, not that the distinction mattered, for Ronan Royce had eventually turned his eyes to the mountains of the moon. The great mountain range of this eastern realm was home to the truly established wild folks. Perhaps far more formidable and dangerous compared to the sparse and scattered groups in the lowlands that they just bested. The so-called Highlanders were not to be underestimated, and the terrain of those infamous mountains was much more so. And as covered, time was of the essence, for when the exploits reached the clansmen's ears, they might just actually come together to make the task that much harder for anybody. Consequently, after subduing about 2 lesser-known clans, the infamous Black Ears were the first to try and lend an ear. Or try to take ears. Truly true to their name, birthed from their habit of chopping off the ears of their victims, and wearing those as a necklace. Ears that turned black from rot. And they fought like madmen and madwomen. With their woman leader being named Chella, daughter of Chake. A fact that was known after some interrogation, with the young lord chuckling at her for being a black pantier. For their madness meant nothing against the Bronze, and the surviving Black Ears themselves were the ones roped up in one long piece of rope. Echoing their defeat with the cruel trophies that they were proud of. And under this chain bounding, they were to be transported straight to the Eyrie and its sky cells, to await judgment. Of course, soon to follow at their side were the Moon Brothers. Moon worshippers in the mountains of the moon, who attacked under the guidance of the moon during the peak of the night. They most likely hoped to aid the escape of the captured Black Ears that they apparently had a close bond with. Alas, their intent was already deduced by the Order of the Bronze Order, so their night raid was easily reversed, and they can at least move together in bounding ropes with the very clan that they had bonds with. Next to try another night raid against the Bronze Order were the Howlers. And they really tried their terror. Guttural howls of men echoing through the gullies at night, meant to break the courage of those who heard them before blades were drawn. Unfortunately for them, their odd howls were matched by the barks of the K9s. And aside from matching against the men who were tasked with the night's watch, they were confronted with bronze warriors whose sleep was disrupted and had anger to vent. Before long, the howlers could howl no more. With dirty traveling undergarments stuffed into their mouths as a form of petty vengeance. Accordingly, their leader, White Eyes, descendant of the White-Eyed, didn't have to suffer such an embarrassing fate. For he died fiercely and honorably against the young Bronze in single combat. Yet it was not really single combat when the White-Eyed men had two howling wolves to fight alongside him. Still, their triarchy of men and wolves were defeated, with knives lodged deep into each of their foreheads after the young lord precisely threw them. On a unique encounter, they then found another cave-dwelling clan, who called themselves the Batmen. Yet they were not that fierce, only shrieking ki-ki-ka at the sight of them to call upon the rush of the many bats that also lived in their large cave. But after those numerous bats rushed out, they were easily solved, and that was it. For they were just batshit crazy, most likely from eating bat shit. Of course, what made this unique is due to the fact that the Royce men's easygoing little leader was actually quite solemn after hearing this clan's name. But then just oddly japing that if these bat men had billions and trained with Tibetan monks, then they might actually have been the ones that were defeated. Granted, the order members just counted that along with his many eccentricities. Supported by his command to collect as many of the batshit. For they were to apparently be used for great advancements of the future. Soon in this mountain cleansing journey, the Bronze Order came across the more infamous milk snakes, and that made for an interesting match. But the process was all the same. The only difference was to be on the lookout for being nicked by their blades. What these milk snakes milked from snakes wasn't milk, after all. It was venom. Fortunately, after plenty of experience using nets, bolas, and lassos, they had no need to really get close. Perhaps only dodging or shielding against the poison projectiles that were flung away. It made the notorious milk snakes really just akin to the many tribesmen and savage clans before them. Especially when the young Bronze took away their snake-like element of sneaking and surprise, by just rushing at them with an unsuspected raid. Of course, as a self-given reward for his keen efforts, the young Royce took out his pencil and brought paper, ready to write things down. Clearly expecting to extract the milk snake's methods for extracting unique snake juice. Soon after, he did the same to the spotted and caught redsmiths. In spite of this clan's much improved weaponry that was a step above stone tools and stolen blades, they were just no match. After tens and tens and tens of clashes, the Order of the Bronze was nothing to scoff at, which may just be the main goal in this ambitious task all along. Experience and a winning momentum were key. Even when they are mostly using restraint in these battles and confrontations. Of course, the capture of these blood iron melders with non-lethal means was a must, for they probably might hold very substantial knowledge. With a curiosity on where they actually spotted the materials they were smithing. Was it stolen from Vale forges and material reserves? Or was there a chance that they knew a mine-worthy spot in these large expanses of mountains? Other than that, those of Royce blood in the midst also showed some measure of caution, as these redsmiths might truly have a trace of being the ancient Bronze King's olden vassals. For redsmiths apparently relate to coppersmiths, and copper is quite essential for the making of bronze. Granted, the paths had diverged in this long passing of time, and even the Royces, who should remember, could no longer recall. Much less a clan that had thrived in backward savagery. So, for what they're worth, the young Bronze would make sure to squeeze it out of them. Just as he did with the previous ones who could only divulge what they know. And that was no longer just a matter of their young lord being persuasive, but more on the fact that he used tortures as well. Which were just tickles at their simplest, and perhaps it was best not to mention to anybody else about those tricks that were far, far worse. Worse to the point that many of the feral-painted dogs actually lost their color, and the spectating stone crows might have just turned to stone from shock. After all, these two infamous Aaron-killer clans have inevitably been vanquished by the unstoppable Bronze as well. With their crow-dog leftovers being sent to the Eyrie for trials. Yet most of them are likely to be judged by the current Lady Paramount into an open moon door.